Welcome to No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder news, reviews, and interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perram.
In honor of International Game Master Appreciation Day, today's main segment is dedicated to Game Master tricks, tips, techniques, and philosophies. Perram and I are both experienced GMs, but in the name of greater recall knowledge results, we are joined by two Paizo GMs of note, Director of Game Design, Jason Bulmahn. Hello, Jason.
Hey there, everybody.
And Managing Developer, Amanda Hamon. Hi, Amanda.
Hey, Ryan. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Well, we're actually super psyched that you two are on, and apparently the audience is as well, because on Discord and on Patreon earlier we said, if anyone has any GMing questions for our guests, let us know and we'll work them into the interview. They had questions.
Oh, did they? Oh, I'm
They
excited.
did. We are going to get to them as quickly as possible, but I do want to establish a little something about our GMing philosophy, our GMing experience, just to kind of set the tone, get the ball rolling. So let's start with why we GM. And Jason, we'll start with you. So other than fun, what are your priorities as a GM? What are you trying to get? What experience are you trying to deliver to your players?
Well, I was talking about this earlier today. I as a GM, I think it's really super critical that you realize your job is to be a part of a story, right? We do this because we're getting together to build a narrative together. This isn't reading a book where I passively have something come to me. It's an interactive experience. And as a game master, your job is to kind of set the stage. You kind of bring up the lights, make the scenery, and make an environment that your players can really frolic and have fun in. You're kind of creating this world with them, and that's a really rewarding experience. But you got to remember that, they are the stars of this story, and your story is there for them to play with, not for them to be railroaded by. So it's a delicate balance of understanding your important position in the story, but also realizing that you're not the middle of it.
Now that is a wise, and it sounds like an experienced point of view. So I'm curious, has that always been your point of view, or is that something you had to learn over the years?
We all started somewhere. Everybody as a GM has those moments that you imagine this scene in your head, and it finally gets there, and the PCs are supposed to talk to this guy and find out this pivotal piece, and it's this huge reveal of a moment, and instead they end up talking to the baker in the corner, and when the noble tries to come to him, they kill him, and now you're screwed. And you get frustrated and angry because your story isn't working out the way that you wanted. But that's where you made the mistake, because it's not your story, it's the group's story. And they decided to talk to the baker, so you better come up with something that baker has that's really important, right? I think that's, I think everybody starts with, I've got this great big scripted plot, and never survives.
What about you, Amanda? How do you make sure that the players at your tables are having fun?
So I do very much like what Jason said, understanding that as the game master, I'm there to facilitate the story that's being told. And I'm specifically leading players into the story that interests me, that I think is rewarding and fun and exciting, and that will lead to fun cinematic moments at the table that they'll remember for a long time to come. That is always the goal. That is not always the reality, but that is always the goal. And so for me, it is similar to the way Jason said, very much about the immersion and the interactivity of going through that story and finding the depth of the player characters as well as the NPCs, and how the decisions that they make lead them down the path of character development and exploration. And it's a very reflective process. Even more fundamentally than the disparity between players and GMs is the fact that role playing in general allows us to explore things about ourselves, and allows us to really think about how would our character react when they have important choices in front of them? How would I react as a person? And that really lets you kind of work through and grow as a person while you're doing that through the vehicle of your characters, so that there's less of just like a difficult sort of narrative to it. It's something that you can do in kind of a safe environment. So for me, facilitating those type of things and letting players have all of the tools at their disposal to create those stories, to tell those stories, and to have those narrative arcs is really why I do it, because it is very rewarding for me to not only be able to have the players explore the story that I've created, but have them do new things with it and have them create sides of their characters that they didn't know exist, and have me sort of feel like I'm clever and, messing with the machinations of things behind the scenes and seeing what kind of comes out of that petri dish. That's really entertaining for me.
Now, I did play in your game at PaizoCon one year, and I'm trying
You
to
did.
find the name of the module. But one thing that I remembered was that your GMing style was very similar to mine in that it's got a lot of forward momentum. Like,
Yes.
you'll give the players their room, and as soon as you realize they've handed the ball back to you, it's like, go, go, go. The adventure's going on. Things are going on. Let's move
Yes.
forward. And
There's
it was
never any
enjoyable to be on the
downtime.
other side of that.
Yeah, it is important for me. I feel like to get the pacing right and to really create an entertaining, engaging experience. One of the metrics that is always running in the back of my mind when I'm running a game is, are people engaged at the table? And I'm watching very carefully the body language and the interactions happening between the players and the players with me, so that my goal is always, if at all possible, that there's not one player who's dominating the action at the table. There's not one player who's sitting there on their phone not paying attention to anything. I really want the table to be cohesive and to feel like they're accomplishing something and that they're in it together, as opposed to somebody trying to win or me trying to sometimes I do try to kill them, but me always trying to kill them and make sure that that their entertainment is secondary. It's all of this collaborative group team building type of experience for me. And so like you experienced at my table, plots moving forward is a key part of that for my style.
Whereas Jason, I haven't been at your table as much. I've mostly just been, you've run demos for me, but because of Knights of Everflame, we get to see you GMing quite a lot. And you seem to have a very methodical approach, or at least you do on your actual play. So how does that compare to your home game? And what would you say is your GMing style?
So I think what you see in Knights looks really methodical, but in fact is kind of the same sort of orchestrated chaos that I do at home. My GMing style is heavy on preparation. I like to have a lot of avenues open in front of me, but ultimately at the table, I kind of take what the players give me. If they want to go down one avenue, if they want to explore a different way, we find a way to make that work. I try and anticipate a lot of the paths they might choose, but, I'm also, I pride myself at my ability to kind of pick up the ruined pieces and juggle them back together. You'd be surprised how much of that show was actually entirely ad hoc on set in the moment and not scripted or, at all. I mean, the show isn't scripted, but, plotted is what I mean, right? Like, it's not like I had every encounter fine-tuned. Some of them got thrown together, behind the screen with me rapidly scratching notes between characters' turns, trying to figure out how to keep the story moving. But
That's one of the, yeah. Go ahead.
it's like a critical job, a critical tool in any GM's toolkit is the ability to just make it keep moving, even though the players are breaking it with every tool that they have.
That is one of the most fun parts, right? When
Yeah.
you're GMing, is keeping that veneer up that you know what you're doing and that you've got an answer to every question, and that
Oh, yeah.
you're meeting them with just as much creativity as they're coming at you. But really, you're sort of just pulling it off the top of your head, at least for me. Like, I try to prepare as much, we'll get into this question later. I try to prepare as much as I can, but I know that there are going to be things that the players are going to do that I won't anticipate. There will be avenues that are not covered in the adventure that I'm running or that I didn't plan out in my notes. And, I challenge myself to be ready for those things. And so I run a panel at OrcaCon and sometimes at NorwestCon called Charlatanry and Chicanery, Game Mastering on the Fly, which is, we start out with the secret to GMing is that nobody knows you're full of crap, and going from there. So, and really sort of taking, a lot of pleasure in the fact that I'm making up a lot of this stuff and we're creating this sort of moment that exists in time that wasn't necessarily planned for, but is a fun experience for people.
There's a great line in chat. It's from Kitsune Warlock, No Direction's own Dustin. He says, "No player gets in the way of my campaign."
Okay.
Actually, I'm rather fond of K-Pulv's sentence is if you give the players the option between A, B, and C, they will choose purple.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's
about right.
100% true, and you got to be ready for the purples of the world out there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Once you play with a group long enough, though, eventually you start realizing that, yeah, you're going to prepare 1, 2, 3, and purple. And now you've prepared, so when they pick it, you're like, yeah, ha-ha.
Oh, yeah. That's what's so fun about convention games for me. I GM a lot at conventions, and I do the long 4-hour slots in addition to the demos. And it's so much fun because you're with players that you've never played with in a lot of cases before. There are some repeats, throughout the years of folks who get into your games, but there's a lot of people that, I've never met before, I've never gamed before, and seeing what they bring to the table and the fact that they ask these questions that are like, I have no idea what this building is and what time the shopkeeper decides to go fishing off the bridge in the river, but I'm sure going to give you an answer and we're going to see what you do with that. It's really fun.
Now, you've both used the word preparing a lot. What does that have to do with game mastering?
Nothing really. You have to have writing on paper so that people think that you have prepared and you know what you're doing, but really, it's not important.
I can't tell you how many times I've held up like a notepad behind the GM screen and been like, let me check my notes, and then flip to like a blank page just so that it looks like I know what I'm doing and to buy my brain like the 10 seconds needed to invent some bullshit.
That's a really good point, Jason. There's a little bit of performativeness in when players ask if they can do something or what happens when they do a thing or they ask a question and you have no idea, but you've got a bunch of papers in front of you and you shuffle them around and you look meaningfully at what's in front of you as if they're like, oh no, they planned for this and you didn't, but you want them to think that you did so that when you say something, it's kind of profound and gives them the sense of, that they're moving things forward.
There's a meme I enjoy where it's like players saying, wow, did you prepare that entire campaign? GM looks at his notes, it just says sexy goblin ? And GM's like, yep. Yeah, I did.
Hey, that's a complete campaign.
The sexy goblin campaign. Oh yeah.
Okay. Coming to this year's Gen Con. Actually I do actually do an awful lot of preparation for my games, especially, kind of higher stakes ones. But even for my home games, I will make sure to spend, an hour or two sketching out notes, building kind of an encounter flow diagram of what I think the evening is going to be. I always end up writing twice as much as I need, and then I'll use the rest next week. And, but my game notes often look more like a flow diagram, right? With like boxes and connective lines that are, it's not text. I don't sit down and write out module text for my home games or even the live games I've run. Most of those are just outlines with reminders and notes and lists of pieces that I need. Because I personally find that for me, the hardest thing is remembering all of the little bits and details. Like I will build for like the shows that I create for streams and whatnot, I'll build like scene notes that'll be like, it occurs here. This is the location. Here's relevant details. These are the players that are in the scene. And I don't mean the player characters. I mean, these are the characters that are appearing in this scene that are important. Here's their relevant information that they have in this scene and any play notes that I have. Most of it's just like, you would see it in a stage play, just kind of like, let us set the scene, and then I just ad lib and wing everything in the moment because that's the most natural and the most normal. But that's the level of prep that I do.
I do a very similar situation. I don't necessarily do the flowchart thing, but I do essentially a rough outline of the progression of the plot and then key locations and key NPCs. And a lot of times, though, that will need to change because where I expect that all of these breadcrumbs are going to lead the PCs to go talk to who is going to end up being the main NPC or maybe even the villain before they realize it's the villain. They don't pick up those breadcrumbs. They're over on the other side of town. They've picked up another thread and just run with it. And I'm totally off script. But I at least try to keep my mind somewhat straight and somewhat organized and, like reminding myself, okay, here are the plots and here are the points that are going to move things forward and here are the important NPCs. And, like Jason said, you change things in the moment when you have to, but having something written down that I can look at and remind myself of where things are really at is very important for me.
Now, Perram, how would you describe your GMing style?
Well, I am really, when I try to GM, I realize that most of the people that have come to my table are doing so because they have a fantasy of what playing in this game is going to be like, or at least what they hope it's going to be like. And the more that I know those players, the easier it is for me to do this. But I try to do this even at convention games, or just try to really guess some of the early conversations I have with them before the game comes out, what they're wanting to get out of it. And to the extent that is possible, I try to make sure that everybody at least gets some of that. You might have the players that are there to like really method act this one character type they like, or they really like this one special ability and they want to show it off. You've got your power gamers that want to flex their knowledge of the system, and you just got the casual people that are just there to improv or do comedy or see how many one-liners they can fit into a single combat round. And all of those play styles I view as valid and can work together and have a great experience together if you encourage, prod, poke, and move the spotlight in the right directions. And I also have the things I want to get out of that experience too. I try not to be too unselfish about things and have fun myself. But for the most part, it's like, did I give them what they were hoping to receive? And if I manage that, that's when I think I did a good job GMing.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I played for a long time with my friend Matt. We were in the same group for like 10, 15 years, and he would probably frustrate me more than most people just because I was having trouble predicting what he would want. And it was when we were talking about GMing, and he was saying, like, if you're playing a paladin in my campaign, you'll definitely get a Holy Avenger by the end of the campaign. And that's when I started to put together, like, to Matt, his campaign or his character is a Lego set with instructions, and he's already got the finished product in mind, and like the process of creating that thing is really important to him. Whereas to me, it's just like somebody else designed that. Like, why I didn't understand why he had ownership of that. Whereas I would just have the loose bits of Lego. And once I actually found something that it was cool, I had ownership of that. And so we were just like, it was just a matter of making that connection of like, what is fun about the way he plays to him that made me make the game fun for him as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to the question you had earlier about preparing style, well, first, I do believe preparing is important. We've had this argument a lot before.
Argument, just different philosophies.
Yeah. Different philosophies. And no, I actually have a lot of respect for what you're capable of pulling off. But what I usually prep is what the main moving factors want to happen, and then the game, what that will happen should the PCs do nothing, and then try to predict a little bit of what might happen, but then mostly just sort of, make that the simulation that's going, and then just see where they're able to kick the golf balls.
Sure. Ryan, why don't you share a little bit about your GM philosophy?
So I think the GM's main role is the fun facilitator. And that does include the GM's fun as well. You got to make sure you're having fun, but it's just about making sure you're fulfilling what the players are looking for individually. And so, like, when we get to the questions, some people had like questions about like, oh, what if you've got a group where people have mixed goals and mixed enjoyment, like mixed things that they enjoy at the table. And it really is about making sure that as a group, it feels coherent, but you are addressing every individual person, figuring out what they want to do, figuring out why they come to the table, and figuring out just what the game means to them, and just delivering that as much as possible, while also giving yourself the fun that, that you like. GMing is fun. GMing should not feel like a responsibility. And so making sure that you're also having fun while you're being responsible for everyone else's fun. We've got a couple of other questions here before we move on to the questions we got from chat, or not from chat, but from Discord. But Perram, can you remind people that if you are watching live, you can also interact with us and our guests?
Yes, indeed, because every episode of No Direction is recorded live in front of a Twitch audience. And if you join us every Wednesday at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern, that is 6 o'clock p.m. Paizo Standard Time, You can get on the Twitch chat with us, chat with each other, and we try to gather through questions throughout the episode and get as many of those as we can to our guests or ourselves as appropriate. So please make sure that you check us out if you're able to live. And if you're not able to tell us or connect with us live, hop on our Discord, which is the chillest place to hang out and talk about Pathfinder, Starfinder, as well as other No Direction fans and the hosts and personality of the network. And we also collect questions from that area if you know in advance what you want to ask, like we did extensively for this episode.
So I want to talk about influences. What has made your GMing style change? Who are some of the significant people that have made you realize different ways that you can be GMing? Starting with you, Jason.
I've played with a lot of GMs over the years. I kind of came up into gaming through organized play with the RPGA. And, over the years, you play with so many different people. You play with so many different GMs. You play with so many different players. You really get to see kind of everything under the sun. And over the years, I've just kind of assembled bits and best practices from various GMs, like some sort of Voltron. And there's not. I've certainly played with a lot of GMs that I really admire their style and what they're capable of doing at the table. But there's no one that like I try and emulate. There's just I really like how they handle this part of the game, or I really like how I'm still trying to remember what GM first introduced me to the way. Like I start all of my recurring game sessions the exact same way. I start them off by like I have a code word that I train all my groups that when I say it, it means the game is started. And that is always when we last left our intrepid band of adventurers. And then I start the recap. And it always gets everybody to put down their phones, to focus in on the game. And it's little tricks like that. It's not a big deal. It's not a thing. It's an affectation. But it's a way that I signal to players. And I don't remember what GM I even learned that from. But I'm pretty sure it was somebody in the RPGA. So if they're out there, let me know. I'll give you credit. I stole your opening style. But I mean, that's kind of it. I've been really impressed with some of the GMs I've seen lately in the past few years on Twitch, running various games. Matt Mercer is obviously a pro and knows what he's doing. But there's a lot of incredibly skilled GMs out there. I love the way Eric Campbell runs games. I'm spacing on his name, but he ran 10 Candles for the folks over on Geek and Sundry and did a fantastic job with that game. So from all of them, I've learned to, kind of try and up my own game as best I can. So, yeah.
Amanda, were you just born with all your GM skills, or do you have other GMs to credit?
Oh, absolutely. I have many. I also have a background in organized play, but when I started as a young teenager, everything that I played in at my original D&D group was all homebrewed. And so for the longest time, and I feel like that was a lot more common back then. This was in the 3rd edition 3.5 days. And it was very much a social event of everybody going to the one friend's house who owned all of the books, and we looked through everything and we made our characters, and we had the one guy who was the DM, and it was all his homebrew stuff and his homebrew world. And so for me, building campaigns and characters and stories and having it carry through for a very long period of time over many, many sessions, that particular game actually lasted over 10 years through many moves of my own. And so that was just kind of a natural thing starting out for me was, of course you build everything yourself and your story is your own and everything is something that you have written and come up with because that's just the way that I played. So I started out in that, and that really spoke to me as a writer and somebody interested in stories and somebody who was looking for very unique things that at the time was not really very present in media, with the different types of high fantasy stories being told with diverse characters and heroes and interesting interactions and things going on and fantastical elements. Being able to come up with that stuff on my own and run games in it and have it come to life with my friends was a very, very rewarding, entertaining experience for me. So I came from that kind of crucible moved into more organized play when I started dabbling into freelancing and started becoming more serious about having this potentially be a career for me. I saw it as professional development. So I played as much organized play as I could of early Pathfinder society for first edition Pathfinder. And like Jason, ended up having lots and lots of GMs. I lived in Indiana at the time. And so there was a very core group of people in the college town that I lived in. I worked at Purdue University, which is in Lafayette, Indiana. And so there were a lot of staple GMs who were running things out of that store, and then big groups of folks who were coming in and out. And so we really got to test our GMing style with people with all levels of experience, like organized play does. And so I picked up things here and there that really melded into that homebrew improvisational style, and learned the difference between homebrew and being an improv focused GM, and the importance of not having table variation and creating an experience that is balanced and that really hinges on the rules. And understanding, you can kind of have the best of both worlds when you have home games. When you're running for credit for organized play, you've got to go further on one end. When you're totally at home and you're making up your entire campaign setting, then you can go all the way on the other end. And so I really got to see a spectrum of stuff coming from those very divergent types of backgrounds. And then, I ended up getting hired at Paizo, and got to experience some of the best GMs in the world who work at Paizo. James Jacobs is one of my favorite GMs in the way that he really personifies the monsters and is a very visceral and in your face with the things that happen. He's very combat focused, and it's a very high octane, high energy, fun type of experience. Crystal Frazier is another one of my favorite GMs, who is amazing in the sense of just the deep, meaningful stories that she's able to tell, and the emotion that she brings to her NPCs, and the thought-provoking moral quandaries that she's putting in front of them, and the ways that she's having the PCs sort of decide how they're going to do the right thing. And that is a really fun experience. There are so many other folks who are amazing GMs as well. I have a very close friend who's a director of operations over at Kobold Press, who is one of my favorite GMs for NPCs, and the emotion that he can bring, and how he can do these different accents and really get everybody at the table to care about those NPCs and what happens to them, and becoming friends and sort of intertwining them into the PC's backgrounds. It's just this really amazing skill that he has. So, a lot of things I shamelessly steal and try to make my own. And, I consider myself sort of my own style, but I'm very much influenced by the people that I admire who have those skills.
So I'm surprised you both have very broad answers, because really I have like 3 people that I can very specifically say absolutely changed how I think of the game. The first one was Jeffrey Burnett, who introduced me to the game. I was on a high school trip, and he was there, and he just kind of mentioned Dungeons and Dragons, and I had so many questions. And we didn't have any dice, we didn't have any rules, but he just ran sessions for us every night, and it was like amazing, and it just made me want to get into the storytelling side of the game. But then when we got back to our school from the trip, and we were starting playing the game, and actually rules got involved, I realized that he kind of hated that there were rules to role-playing games. He just wanted the storytelling side. So then on the flip side, I had my friend Mark Lankto, who very much just like did not start a campaign until he had a very clear picture of everything about the campaign, including the rules and everything. And it was like, he was a little harder to react to the unpredictable stuff, but it really did show me like, oh, dungeon isn't just the room you're creating one room at a time. You can actually plot out the whole dungeon, and then, then introduce your players to it. And so that was just how I played for years, until I met Matthew Binks, who introduced the theatrics of it. So he is a composer, and he has what's called an echoic memory. It's like a photographic memory for sounds. And so his ability to jump from different characters to be completely consistent throughout the whole campaign, with just like background characters we met once and then maybe bumped into again weeks later, or just asked about, and he had no plans for, but he was completely consistent, and it really felt like 50 people were GMing this game. And that's when I
really cool.
really feel like I leveled up as a GM. Like that's when I felt like I got a prestige class as GM. Like leveling changed at that point. and my game has never been the same since. Perram, how about you? Are there any specific people or broad people that you can credit for how you GM?
I mean, there's the person who introduced me to GMing in the first place, Ricky Hamilton, who shares my birthday, which is today. So we always get each other
Happy
really
birthday,
cool.
Perram.
Happy birthday.
We always get each other really cool gaming gifts today. And he just like exposed me to the concept of role playing, which I will always thank him for. But it really gets a bit broad from that point. And to back up something both Amanda and Jason said is, I really think too many game masters and players out there deride organized play unfairly, because the organized play programs and convention gaming has been some of the most valuable learning experiences I've ever had as a game master. I rarely play under a game master that I didn't pick up some skill or some new technique that I didn't know about before, whether it's the very first Gen Con GM where the GM was having to do a pirate captain voice and he fake twirled a coin between his hands, and that just sold everything I needed to know about that character in just a sentence, to John Compton's when I got to play under John Compton's game, and just like the amount of pure raw energy and how much he was able to pull that energy out from each of us. I think I played in that game with you, Amanda, actually. Or even playing with Jason on stage and just showing that not only how his energy protruded, but he was able to tease out some really great performances from all the people he was playing with, and also seeing that same thing in Oblivion Oath and in Knights of the Everflame. And we are having like a sort of really golden moment right now for role playing because of how many streams there are and how easy it is for a player getting involved right now to just experience so many different ways that a game can be run. But that's still passive, and to be active, going to a convention, go to your local conventions, go to your local game nights, just get in as many different games as possible, even if it's for a system you don't know. I mean, I've learned so much playing on Savage Worlds tables, and then I had one of the best experiences I ever had was for a Lady Blackbird game that I've never played before or since, but just picking up these little tips, these little methods that these game masters are using, the way they voice characters, the way they speed through combats, in some rare cases, which I hope I continue to see less and less of, ways not to do things when I see a bad GM just ruin the fun of all the players at the table.
Yeah.
It's all valuable, and I think experience and practice is the only way you're going to get good.
Yeah, I've always thought that organized play is the crucible that forges better gamers. If you haven't experienced it, you really owe it to yourself to do so. You are going to play with some people who are less than great. You're going to play with some people who are absolutely stellar. And all of it's going to teach you not only to be a better game master, but also to be a better player and be a better participant in the story, because you're oftentimes playing with strangers. And that means you have to kind of share the spotlight and share the scene. It teaches you some valuable, just like social tools at the table that actually pay really good dividends when you are back with people that you're comfortable and familiar with. I mean, I know it pointed out some rather terrible habits, that I had in my early days, about hogging the spotlight and stuff. And, it helps you realize that that's not okay, and that there's better ways to do things.
Well, and to go back to what I was saying about my friend Matt, it took me years to figure out that he wasn't a problem player. We just had a very different philosophy. And once you get really involved in organized play, you're forced to just be more accepting of people and to try to fast track of like, okay, what is this guy's motivation? What is really moving them forward as a player? And you learn to you get outside of your own head, you get outside of your own game table, and you see broadly what is out there, what defines a gamer.
Yeah, you start to understand a little bit more about the different types of players and the different like motivations and goals that players have that they may not even vocalize at the table, but you kind of start to see why a player might always play, a really aggressive martial character, or a character who's always interested in, doing research and finding out the background of a story, or a character, who is very much like an entirely roleplay character, and their mechanics don't matter as much to them as long as they get to roleplay and like tease out information in that way, then that's that player's goal. So like learning the sort of different play styles and the different things that players want to get out of the game is very important, and organized play will expose you to literally everything under the sun, every type of player that there is out there, for good or ill, but often for very good, like Jason said.
I remember there was a couple of players when I was doing the Tier 1 Game Master crew for you all at a Gen Con, and I was supposed to do 7 slots. You all had me do 11.
Oh no!
That's organized play.
Yep. And they were the horrible slot you all don't do anymore, where it was I sat down with a list of scenarios and the players picked one.
Oh yeah.
But there was a father-son pair that were just like really super into character, and they could have easily stolen the spotlight on every single scene because they knew organized play, they knew all the storylines, they knew all the NPCs, and they were on it. But instead of hogging that spotlight, what they did was they would reach out and have their characters pull the other players' characters into those conversations, into those scenes, find out more about their characters' backgrounds, what their characters wanted. And it just made the entire table light up. And everybody from them to the shy person in the corner who you could tell this was the first time they ever played Pathfinder before, were just absolutely into it and doing voices and having a ton of fun. And just seeing that, even as a player, they were able to not just contribute to their fun, but to get fun into the other characters' lives. It's a lesson I've learned anytime I play, and you might see me try to do similar things if you listen to any of the actual plays I'm in, like Adventurous or something. You'll see Glanville constantly asking other characters what they think about situations.
I have noticed that, and I also noticed you often do it when Crystal has to research something as a GM, and it's something that I'm remembering as a GM, instead of just being like saying, give me a second, I got to look something up. I'll be like, hey, didn't you two have a disagreement or something? Or like just prompt a conversation so that then I can go back to what I'm doing and I don't have to worry that I'm missing something important.
Yeah, any sort of redirect to get them to not pay attention to the fact that you're kind of scrambling for a moment or two is always really good.
That's a super useful skill when you're live on Twitch.
Oh, yeah.
Being like, hey, why don't you guys talk? Well,
Or just letting characters sort of back and forth where you might normally have something happen like off screen that gets their attention, just letting them kind of play through that conversation while you're over there frantically looking something up while people aren't noticing that's a good strategy.
So I think it's a good time to start taking some of the questions we got from Discord. I haven't noticed any questions show up in chat. So chat, if you have asked any questions and I've missed them, just go ahead and ask them again. I will be a little more diligent trying to grab them. But one of them, something you said, Jason, reminded me of a question asked by Thorax74, where he's just talking about how expectations are a lot higher on GMs now that there are actual plays and live play podcasts that are out there. So what is your experience with changed expectations, and how do you think GMs should react to what's often called the Mercer effect?
So yeah, I've seen this, and it's hard, right? I mean, all of a sudden there are GMs that some people look at and are professional, and I don't really know what that means. I mean, I think the thing you have to remember is that with something like Critical Role and with Knights of Everflame, right, the people at the table are all actors and comedians, and they have training. They went to school to learn how to do voices and characterization, right? And to say this is what my home group's going to be is setting yourself up to an unrealistic expectation. That said, I still think you as a GM can have just as deep, just as meaningful, just as rich a story with anybody you get to sit down at the table. It's all about talking to them and talking to them about what they want to see out of their character, what kind of growth they want to see, what direction they want to go, and working with them to make that a reality in the story that you're trying to tell. It may not be filled with perfect voice acting and, spotless dialects and, professional costumes, but that doesn't mean that it still can't be the fun you want it to be. I think it is really unfair to yourself and to your game to hold it to those standards. That's just unrealistic.
Amanda, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's pretty much the crux of things. I think that it is important to point out. You don't even necessarily have to point it out. I think it's kind of self-evident when you're watching a Critical Role. You know, the credits of the players and Matt are, you know, pretty forthcoming, and they're very upfront about who they are, and you know that's why they're so entertaining, is because they are professional entertainers and actors and voice actors. And so, you know, that's not to say that other GMs will never reach that threshold, so why even try? It's just more like that is a production that is meant to be watched, is meant to be consumed as entertainment. And when you're running your game, or you're playing your game that your friend is running, it's a little bit more of a collaborative storytelling process. It's not, I'm sitting back and I'm watching people perform for me. And yes, they're playing a game and I'm following the way the rules are working, but I'm ultimately kind of watching a TV show and commenting on it, you know, on Twitch. That it is a different medium. It is literally a different medium when you're sitting and you're playing. And so as long as everybody at the table, including the GM and all of the players, sort of start out with that baseline of understanding that's like, we're all in this together. I'm the GM. I'm not perfect. If I need to look up a rule, I'll just look up a rule. You're a player, you know, you're not perfect. If you realize that you know, did something incorrectly and you say it, like, we'll figure out a way to make this work. But just kind of being kind to yourself and giving yourself room for error, and understanding that, you know, this is supposed to be fun, this is not supposed to be a high pressure thing, is really key. Because the minute that it becomes something that is an obligation, that's high pressure, that you're trying to feel like you're living up to some unrealistic standard, then why are you doing it? You know, you're sort of defeating the purpose of what the game is, which is to have fun with your friends.
Let's not just underestimate the effect that editing has. Unless you're watching them do live performances,
Yeah.
a good video or audio editor job is to make you seem more brilliant than you are.
Yeah.
Just like a real editor for the books you all write. Not to say that you all aren't wonderfully brilliant, actually, but
No, I mean,
like
our
they
stuff is just as much
Yeah.
bullcrap as anything else.
and like you can, if you do get to see one of these productions live or one of these productions after they've been edited for post, it's a completely different thing. I mean, we're nowhere near that level of performance, but just watching the episode of Adventurous live here on Twitch and then listen to what Ryan does to it, like the 4-minute section where we're trying to figure out how grapple works again because we've been playing too much second edition, that gets completely eliminated, and you didn't know, like, all the comedic timing is lined up, all the awkward pauses are removed, and
Yeah. Again,
Yeah.
it's a game that you're playing in real time. It is not an entertainment that's being created with no production.
I also like
Yeah.
that you brought up, Amanda, that because I was thinking of this as something players might be putting on the GM, but players might be putting expectations on themselves as well. If they show up to a
Yeah.
table and they're like, I'm not as good as the players in the actual place I'm listening to, then they might feel like they're doing something wrong. So, yeah, probably the
Yes.
best way to approach it is just to be like, draw the line. Like, you know, we
Sure.
are a little league team. We are not the Major League Baseball,
Yeah.
and make sure that as long as everyone's having fun, as long as everyone's approximating and getting closer to what they want with every session, then that's what you're getting. You are rewarding yourselves through improvement, not through showing up perfect.
Exactly. And the minute that those pressures are removed is the minute that it becomes the fun group-oriented activity that it's meant to be, as opposed to trying to live up to those standards that are, you know, that are not real, that's not reality, because it is edited, because they're professionals, because they've got production staff, all of those reasons.
and that's something
Yeah,
that
Yeah, it's shocking how many people make those things happen, right?
Yes,
You
exactly.
know, every episode of Knights of Everflame had 20 people that you never saw on camera helping to make that thing go, making sure all of the sound and lighting and makeup and everything looks great. Then, you know, after it's filmed, it gets edited and chopped. Like, most of our episodes are more like 3.5 hours long, but they get cut down to 250, right? You know, there's no way we sat at that table and no one ever had to use the bathroom for 3 hours. I mean, it's just not realistic. And, you know, we would have flubs and we would have to go, oh, wait, no, you weren't even in that spot. We have to take that whole round back and do that over again because the people online will notice. And, but in your home game, it's okay, right? It's just like, that's fine, whatever. I can't do that, though. Otherwise, I'm going to hear about it on YouTube comments for the rest of my life.
Oh, it's true. Yeah, the internet is so brutal when it comes to stuff like that.
They are not forgiving.
Nope.
A couple of comments in chat I'm going to point out too. Numbat18 is saying distinguish between the inspirational levels and the minimal acceptable standards. And Kitsune Warlock is saying, like, just pat yourself on the back if you're showing up consistently.
Yeah.
It's true. It's very hard for adults, with working lives and families to find a time to come together. So yeah, that's realistic.
I have enough trouble getting 4 people at work where we make games to sit down and play a game.
People are just so busy. It's true.
Yeah.
And I think too many groups that have this sort of line of thinking dismiss some of the advantages that your home game is going to have that no actual play produced show is ever going to have. I mean, with some exceptions, they're not going to be invited to the other character's wedding or to hang out for 12 hours playing board games and chatting about like the latest Star Wars movies. Like, without exception, the groups that I form locally and play with regularly, we become very strong friends both at the table and away from the table. I mean, I've had to go drive to change a tire at 2 a.m. for one of my players, and I can expect that some of them would help me move out of my house. Actually, they did once, and those are fringe benefits and true friendships that you're going to have that doesn't come with the lights, camera, action.
Exactly.
Good luck getting Matt Mercer to come change your tire.
I thought some of the friends you made online were good friends to you, Perram, but whatever.
Oh.
Oh no! Wah, wah.
Where's my popcorn?
Jason's just here for the lulls.
That's right. Yeah. Well,
next question from chat is from Patreon is from Undead Fish. Wants to know if you ever fudge dice or DCs. Amanda.
So we talked a little bit before about the disparity between your homebrew games, your home games, and organized play, where table variation is not supposed to be a thing. The answer to that question is when I'm running a home game, a convention game, something that's not for credit, absolutely I fudge dice. And it's not even, I usually roll in the open. That's the thing. Like, you've played at my table before, Ryan, so you know that I tend to stand up and I'm very demonstrative. And I've got voices for all the characters, and I'm a very kind of physical GM, and even just like with running the combat and things. So I roll in the open. I stand up and I throw the dice across the table, and everybody looks at it and shouts out what the result is. If there's some kind of drama going on in the game, and so I can't necessarily fudge that because I'm not rolling behind a screen. But what I do is, I've got the DC in front of me and they don't know what that is. And so I might add a bonus, a discretionary bonus for the role playing that the character has, or maybe there's some circumstance bonus that's appropriate to add there. Or maybe I just straight up lower the DC based on, just the pacing of the game and what is going on and what is going to be the most fun type of result. So there is room for that in homebrew games and convention games. You have to kind of be careful because I feel like there's very much just sort of this veneer that players are expecting that if there's a bad die roll, then they're not going to succeed. So you have to sort of pick and choose when the appropriate time to do that is. But very much you have the discretion as the GM when it could go one way or the other. There's a differential of like ±2. That maybe that is a success when it wouldn't necessarily be according to the DC that's printed in the module, because that's cooler, that's more fun, or the player is super into it or whatever. Organized play, you can't and shouldn't be doing that because table variation again. But that's definitely an option when you're not concerned about that aspect.
Perram, how do you feel about fudging dice?
Well, as a GM, I do occasionally fudge dice in the player's favor. Never in my favor. That's boring. I have way too many tools and levers and thumbs on the scales behind the screens to worry about a little thing like dice getting in the way. But nowhere near as often as they probably think I do, and almost never when they think I've done it specifically, and also very, very rarely in general. I mean, it's like maybe once every 2 or 3 sessions, something gets a little bit fudged when like it absolutely needs to be, or this is definitely going to make the difference between them having fun or not. I find that I actually have more fun just adapting and changing how the game is going to go based on those successes and failures, so that the failures aren't catastrophic or ruining everybody's fun. That's a much more satisfying way to run the games. But the other key is never to let the players know if or when it has happened. And that
Exactly.
ruins every ounce of suspense the game will have if they think that the GM has got their back.
Jason?
Yeah, almost never. You know, I'm not going to say never because I know that I have. Like, I've run tables with little kids and it's their first play experience, and I'm dropping 20s, and I'm just like, yeah, I want you to actually have a good memory of this, and killing you before you get to go probably isn't it. You know, so I almost never. I think there are spots in a story where it's just like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have even rolled this die. I should have just decided, right? It just wasn't that. I knew the story couldn't go the wrong way, so you know, asking you to roll it isn't really relevant. And as I've become a better GM, I've understood those spots more and more about understanding where they're at and being like, I have so many other ways I can solve this problem, and if I know that you have to succeed, I I'm not going to ask you to roll. I'll find a narrative way to make it all make sense, and that's fine. And you know, as far as when my dice go cold and the PCs have a moment of awesomeness, that's fine. You can always, you know, add more liches to the scene. I mean, you know, more
Who
liches.
doesn't love a good lich scene?
That's fine, right? Add a tar bath on, your problem solved.
Plus or minus 2 Tarbathons for that.
That's right. 1d4 plus 1 tar bathons.
So I am not a fan of fudging dice, but mostly because one of my favorite things about the game is how dice can just swing the narrative in a way that a movie, a book won't. Movies and books have to follow a certain narrative structure, and games don't. And so rarely will I fudge dice. I might like round up, or no, not even round up, but just like speed through the math if it doesn't feel super important. That's the closest I come to fudging.
Mm.
Oh yeah, it's like you rolled an 18. Well, let me add my bonuses. Nah, whatever. It's good enough.
Yeah.
I do find that is what I do more often than any direct fudging, is deciding how much of a rules lawyer I'm going to be at this beginning moment.
Yeah.
And I know in
Oh,
chat they're
yeah.
talking about like character deaths and stuff, and I never fudge on a character death because I think that would just undercut the whole concept of this being a game in the first place. But I will say that anytime a significant character death is on the table, I become the biggest rules lawyer who ever rules lawyered to make sure that if this is what the dice said happened, we are absolutely sure that is what the dice said happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very important, I feel like, especially when the players are very emotionally bought into their characters, that, you know, the time for loosey-goosey kind of fun and games narrative stuff ends when the character that they've played for 2 years is now almost going to die. And, you know, I've had players like be on the verge of tears or cry when their characters are about to die, and it's like, that's part of the experience. You know, if something happens and the character dies and, you know, they're rolling bad, or there's a situation that has come up, I'm not going to fudge those dice, right? That's part of the game. But it is very important, I feel like, to have the players have the sense of the drama and the danger, while at the same time, kind of, when those moments aren't happening, have a little bit of room for some fun that can happen.
I'm playing in an Emerald Spire game right now, and we had a new player join after the first session. He's playing a druid. He's got an ape animal companion, and in the first round of the first encounter, not even the first round, in the surprise round, it looked like the ape got killed. And then I was like, well, hold on, you rapid shotted. You couldn't do that in a surprise round. You'd only get one shot. So the ape lived until the next round when he got rapid shotted and killed. And it's like, but wait a second, you readied that action. You can't ready a rapid shot. It's so like this ape survived the whole session, but we are now constantly calling back to the alternate dimensions in which this ape has died twice. But Perram, you mentioned that chat was talking about character death. Fat Ass Frodo's question specifically is, do you stay your hand if the moment isn't dramatic? So does the drama of the moment impact how likely you are to fudge, or does the death make the moment dramatic?
The death makes the moment dramatic, and I think, I mean, like with the success of Game of Thrones, when characters are literally dropping like flies whenever it's appropriate for it to maybe have happened that way, less so in the later seasons than in the early seasons, kind of show that at least that's what people were buying into, that everybody's really vulnerable, even though it didn't really in that way. But I think that if there isn't a real sense of palpable danger anytime initiative's rolled or anytime something dangerous is labeled dangerous, then again, you're not playing a game, you're doing community storytelling. If that's the game you signed up for, if that's the dynamic that you all were agreed to, I mean, if you're playing something like the Excellence, which literally has no death as a rule, then that's fine. But when we're playing Pathfinder and it has rules for dying, then they can die from the first encounter to the last.
I think that depends a lot on the game system you're playing with and where you're at in that game system. Most games change over time, right? So at low levels, yeah, sorry, the dice killed you. We're playing Pathfinder, we're playing D&D. Yeah, low level characters die; they drop like flies. At high levels, unless you're playing with weird house rules, you're not going to drop like flies. You're only going to drop when it's a really serious situation.
Mhm.
And that's okay. That narratively, that works. I think that the danger spot that you can find yourself in as a GM is if you're using either a game system or some house rules or something. I knew some people who are like, yeah, I have a house rule that whenever you roll to confirm the crit, if you roll a 20 again, it's instant death. And I'm like, that must be really fun until you're 14th level and get killed by a pig. I don't know what happened, but I died from a pig. I guess that's a fun story. Actually, now that I said it,
Wild pigs are nothing to joke about, Jason. They're
Yeah,
very
also- It'll teach them not to mess with every pig just cuz.
That's right.
listen, if there's 30 to 50 of them, all right. Anyway, so
And the internet collectively laughs.
topical.
Ah.
So, I think that depends, right? There are certainly other game systems where death is super fickle. I mean, if you're playing Dread, I have seen people knock it down on the second block. And it's
yeah.
like, we're 5 minutes into the game, and I guess you just electrocuted yourself with a fork in the socket. I don't know, right?
Well, that's the fun thing about Dread is when something like that
Yeah.
happens in one of those kind of one-off type of games, like Dread, but there's other games that have that mechanic. You as a
Funny.
game master can just decide when that character is going to die. So I've seen several times, I've done it myself, when a character knocks that tower over or dies in a certain way, I get to play because nothing happens at that time to that character, but you just wait until they are examining that strange skittering noise in the room
you're
or
going
they're
to
opening the
die.
door. Yeah, you're
We
going
just
to
don't
die.
know when.
I just get to decide when now. That's fun.
So we are about 2 questions into the many, many questions we got, and we are at an hour point of the interview. So I'm just going to start asking them. I'm not going to make sure that everybody gets a chance to weigh in. If you have thoughts on it that no one else has brought up, feel free to weigh in. As soon as there's a pause, I'm moving on to the next question.
Lightning round, right?
I've said that before, and I usually get 2 questions into the lightning round. So
Okay.
Dragon Elvish wants to know, what is the difference between how you prepare for a home game, a public game, or an actual play? Jason,
I'll
you've
take
got
this
an
one.
actual play. Do you want to start?
Yeah. So the way I prepare my home games is pretty straightforward. It's a series of loose notes. I know I'm playing with friends. I know I can pause to look things up. I can run a 4-hour session with 15 minutes of prep and flipping through the book for half that time and just sketching down notes. I think whenever I'm doing a live play or whenever I'm doing a recorded show, my entire process is different. And it's not that I'm doing anything different fundamentally, but I analyze what I'm putting together in different ways because all of a sudden I realize that I have a time limit. And I'm also in front of a camera that's recording. And so as a result, I have to be very aware of this is how much story time I have. And I have to get from A to Z in that story. So what I tend to build is an encounter script that I call an accordion, that I can expand it if things are running quick and I can add encounters to it, or I can collapse it. If things are going long, I can just chop pieces out and it doesn't fundamentally break the story. On top of that, I then oftentimes start analyzing those sorts of things with beats, looking for upbeats and downbeats, and especially making sure to switch between upbeats and downbeats in the narrative story. It's in that way that I can kind of push-pull the narrative and the emotion of people watching it. Because I realize that those things are there more for entertainment of the people watching and a little less for the people at the table. They need to have fun for it to work, but the difference between me and my buddies hang out and play a game, that's fun for all of us, but it's not fun to watch. What's a lot more fun is when the story itself has the ebb and flow, and like it's a skill you learn by like reading a lot of books. Hamlet's Hit Points by Robin Law was particularly useful in teaching me about how to analyze narrative structure. And then I to be honest, I also picked up a whole bunch of books on screenwriting to make those work better.
Is that your go-to metaphor? I know you mentioned earlier you had a very playwriting structure to how you plan it. So is the writer is specifically a very structured writer like screenwriting or playwriting? Is that your go-to metaphor for jamming?
Well, kind of like especially when I'm doing kind of shows that I'm producing that are meant to be entertainment. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. People have already figured out how to put these things together in a way that is entertaining and kind of tugs at how humans view entertainment. So I don't need to reinvent that. I just need to learn how to use it in a more open play narrative. And that was the moment that really opened up my eyes when I was writing for Oblivion Oath, and as I started writing for the first season of Everflame, was I just approached it with a different methodology. It wasn't about what encounters am I slotting in here. I started looking at it instead as to what scenes am I creating, who's active in those scenes, what moments in those scenes are positive moments, what moments in those scenes are negative moments, how do they interplay, because it's like if you're watching a movie and nothing but good things happen or nothing but bad things happen, unless it's a tragedy or some sort of heartwarming tale, most people like an ebb and flow of good things and bad things. That's what keeps us interested. If it's too many beats in one direction, if it's too much of one character over no one else, it gets stale, it gets boring, it gets repetitive. For people watching a show, that doesn't work. That they should go play their own game for that. It's much more engaging to be part of it if that's the way the narrative is going to be. If that makes
Amanda,
sense.
did you have a? Oh yeah, it makes sense. Did you have a favorite metaphor for jamming?
I want to say that it's for me very much in a yes and situation in which the GM is the improv actor and the players are kind of the audience. So there's a deep discussion to be had for all the nuances for this, but in general, when a player says, "Can I do this?" or "Is this thing there?" or "Is this thing true?" I always kind of strive to say or to respond in a way that conveys yes and so that they are feeling like they've got a grasp on what you're creating from a world perspective and a plot perspective, but you're throwing a wrench in there. Or sometimes the answer is no, but you don't necessarily phrase it no, you just say, well, yes, but you've got to come back next week because there's this festival and they're preparing for it, and all the blacksmiths are deep at the forge, and you can try to go interrupt them now, but do you really want to? And then the players will, I don't know if I really want to do that. So really sort of like finding a way to prompt players and to have ideas of their own and sort of make them feel like that they are accomplishing things slowly along the way is a good way that I approach it.
And Amanda, starting with you, Dragon Elvish also had a question about what your current influences are. He calls out TV shows or books, but I'm going to weigh in a little bit on this, and it's a little broader than that.
Sure. Wow. So, I mean, I have a lot, and I feel like we all do. Like, we all have our own fandoms. We're all sort of nerds of our own stripe, and so there's a lot of things, that interest me. For Starfinder, I very much consider myself more of the Guardians of the Galaxy type of adventures. Kind of a little bit of Star Wars, a little bit of Star Trek with the space opera stuff, but very much a punchy, fun, bantery type of fun experience rather than like the real grim dark stuff, which, funny enough, when we're talking about books and movies, I watch a lot of horror. I write a lot of horror, and so my current influences, I've been on this like a Korean horror film and show kick, and Netflix has a whole bunch of really great Korean things. Train to Busan is an amazing zombie film that really gets to the core of kind of an outbreak survival narrative, where it's kind of like the film Snowpiercer as well, which is not Korean, but is a point A to point B to point C, and it is, we're following this very tight narrative of these people who are trying to survive and the things that are happening to them, and the ways that people's survival instincts are manifesting, similar in a way to the way alignment works for like Pathfinder, Starfinder. So I've been watching a lot of that. There's another Korean series called Kingdom that is also a zombie narrative, but is set in the 16th century in South Korea, and has all these period costumes, and is this very much just like a royal sort of a familial generational story that then becomes the zombie story, and is really, really intense and visceral in the things that happen. And so finding a way to kind of inject that sort of fantastical but touching on reality, and putting the stark, harrowing choices that these characters are facing in these shows, and creating adventures in which PCs can do that as well, has been a thing that I've been doing recently. I just wrote an adventure for Grimmer Space, which is a
nice.
third party, a fairly high profile third party horror setting that Lou Agresta and Roan Barton are creating, coming up with, and they're working with a whole bunch of different writers. And the adventure that I wrote has to do with a virus that the PCs have, and it affects a very large scale situation. And without spoilers, there's a lot of kind of the things that I find interesting about that Korean zombie film genre and show genre that is into that adventure, that I feel like is surprising, especially to Western audiences, because it unfolds in a less than sort of like traditionally Western way. It's very interesting.
Writing a virus adventure, that's pretty topical.
I turned that in a couple of weeks ago, so yeah.
So I find the thing that influences me more and gets me more in the GMing headspace is more of a critique than any actual media. So like, I would be more inspired by watching an Honest trailer or a Ryan George pitch meeting than I would be watching the movie itself, because it's just looking at it more from the same perspective that I'm looking at things when I'm creating a story as a GM. It's about the pieces. It's about making sure that the narration makes sense. It's about catching yourself, not falling into tropes. And something that really makes me want to write out dungeons, even though I never do that, even when I'm running them, is the Game Maker's Toolkit, which is a great YouTube channel analyzing video games. And he specifically had a series called Boss Keys, where he was just like, here's how Zelda levels work. Here is something that is definitely a key. Here are things that are more abstractly keys, and here are the locks they open, and here's how it all works as a world. And it's fascinating analysis on something that I just completely missed when I'm playing the game, because I'm so focused on being Link that I'm not thinking about how did this dungeon get put together. Undead Fish wants to know about session zeros. Do you tend to start with them? And Shadows Over Scotland adds, do you have a personal checklist for what goes into session 0?
Yeah, I mean, I generally do, right? I think part of the social contract between the GM and the players is, let's sit down and talk about what we all expect. Let's talk about what is going to work in this story. Let's talk about the things that people don't want to see in the story. Let's talk about the things that we want our characters to do, where we want them to go, how we want them to grow. I think there's an element to that is also like, let's talk about, let's give you a chance to, in a non kind of binding way, play around with your character and try and get a feel for it. I think when you don't have it, you kind of still end up having it. It just happens while the adventure is going on, and then it can be kind of a mess with kind of incoherent character decisions early on that you have to kind of go, nah, not that. So I think, I don't know that I specifically have a checklist. It depends a lot on the game and what type of format and what kind of narrative I'm trying to run. I've borrowed a lot of pieces over the years from other games. I find myself doing that more and more and more. Studying kind of other games and how they function and how they build groups and how they build narratives, and using some of their structures. Like one of my favorites, we mentioned Dread earlier. A thing that I picked up is, once I get everyone's kind of narrative, kind of backstory for the basics of their character, I like to ask them one question that is challenging to answer, that doesn't seem obvious, that maybe forces them to think a little differently about their character. That's something that you see on a Dread character sheet, because it's just a list of questions that you have to answer, and some of them are like, "What did you do with that thing you found?" I don't know what that means, but you are now prompted to come up with an interesting answer for it. I did that for the characters for Knights of Everflame, and it turned out really well. It actually helped them really develop characters. For like Omelette, I think her question was, the clan dagger you have is not yours. Whose is it, and why do you have it? Because that's a big thing for dwarves, right? In second edition, they all have these clan daggers that kind of speak to their heritage. But it's things like that during a session 0, it's like, let's explore the characters. Let's talk about it in a group in a way that we all kind of have an idea where we want to go. It's not spoilers. It's just saying, what do you see as the narrative arc of your character? Are you trying to tell a redemption story? Are you trying to tell finding a way to get along with the problems that your character has? Are you trying to, tell a tale of reunification of your family, right? I mean, as a GM, I don't know these things. I can invent things, but they may not be what you want or what you're interested in. So I think they're critical. I think, it's a super important part of getting your group together and talking honestly and frankly about what the story is you want to tell, because it is a cooperative story, and, they have just as much of a say in where it's going as you do.
So I've had some really important session 0s for campaigns, but it feels like as social media has evolved, it's become less important because it's something that we can do a little more passively between sessions. And so it used to be an entire session would be dedicated to it, and then the next week we would start. Whereas now it's like, here's the stuff we're doing in the meantime, and we're all on the same page because we're all chatting, we're all in the same Facebook group. And so then we show up, have like an hour of session 0, and then an hour or 2 of the start of the campaign.
I think the other thing is too, these days especially, like having the bit that's like, let's all talk in a group, that way we can all express what we want to express, but also giving every player a venue that's like, and if you got something you don't want to talk about in front of the others because it's a character secret, or maybe it's something personal, right, that you don't want to experience in the adventure. Giving everyone an avenue to do that is really important, and as game master, you have to give them those possibilities, right? I mean, there are things I don't want to see at a game table, that I don't want to talk about or experience. They're just not something I'm interested in living or reliving. And that's true for everyone who's at your table, and giving them the chance to do that is a really important part of your job.
Yeah, and really, I think calling out that thing early on in a session 0 is really vital to having players both self-reflect, to think like, oh, is there something that I don't want to, or have the players who know that there's something that they don't want to experience or that they're not okay with, to be able to make the decision to come to talk to you, or to know that that's a safe thing that they can do, that they don't have to always have in the back of their mind, oh, I really hope that this doesn't come up because it will be awkward. And that's not fun, and the entire reason that we're playing is to have fun with our friends, and we don't want to accidentally hurt somebody. So I always do a version of session 0, and it, the way and the form that takes is very much dependent on what the game is. If it's a campaign, it's a literal session 0 in which character creation happens and there's discussion amongst the players. And we'll talk, especially if it's a horror game, we'll talk about, is there anything that people are not okay with? If there's something you don't want to mention in front of the group, you can email me, or we can talk later, and have it be just a very upfront, sort of honest type of discussion. Or I do a lot of traveling, and I'll run games for my friends where I'm going, like after conventions or just on personal trips. And that session 0 takes the form of an email chain with all the players. Typically, again, I run a lot of horror, so recently was running with a group of people who I had never gamed. I don't think I had ever gamed with any of them before. We just knew each other from the industry, and so I said, okay, you guys asked me to run a horror game for you. Is there anything that anybody is not okay with? And so that gave them the opportunity to say, what kind of genres that they did like, and if there was anything that they wanted to avoid. That was the form of session 0. But I feel like it is always important to vocalize that's something that you're concerned about as the GM, that it's, you're trying to make everything a fun environment for everyone as much as you can.
Sure. I know when I play with my friend Kathy, I'll, describe something as a GM, and then she'll just be like, what is wrong with you? Why are you like this? And so after the session, I have taken her aside, just being like,
Oh,
is
sorry,
this cool? Like, is that all just
Yeah.
banter and part of it? Or would you prefer
Mhm.
I pull back? And she's like, no, that's absolutely what I like and dislike about you at the same time as a GM. And we have our understanding about what her limits are.
Right. Makes sense.
The next question is not from Patreon, it's from Discord, but it was upvoted by a patron, so I'm putting it in with the patron ones. It is Mike Ferdinando is talking about failing upwards, using fail rolls to advance the storyline rather than dead ending the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's all part of improvising and understanding that you're not going to predict everything that happens. In the same way, you're never going to predict all the choices that the characters make or the ideas that they have. You're not going to predict that what you think is going to be an easy disable device check is going to not be, or that somebody you haven't realized one of the PCs doesn't have a computer skill in Starfinder, or doesn't have something that you thought was going to just be an easy thing to move the story forward. I feel like that is, rather than being a roadblock and a thing that can stymie you as a GM, that can really challenge you, and that can really lead to improving your skills, so that you figure out, okay, now you've got this problem in front of you. You've got a door that's in front of the players, and they've got to get to the other side, which is the plot or the NPC they need to meet, or the MacGuffin or whatever. Now you have to figure out what other avenues do they have to solve that. So in that way, failing forward can be a thing. And in that way, having a failed skill check result or any kind of failure might open up another door that they didn't necessarily think, or you might drop another clue that allows them to move in another direction. So it is a challenge, but it's all part of trying to push things forward from the GM's perspective, of course, without railroading the players.
The game's always kind of had them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
since the earliest days of role-playing games, traps are fail forward, right? I mean, yeah, you failed the roll to disarm it, you take some damage, the story moves on. That's always kind of been a part of the game. But I think, especially as, we've evolved, and I think as you learn your chops as a GM, you start to realize that you can use that kind of all over the place. Like, oh, yeah, this tower's in the middle of the forest. Give me a survival check to find your way there. Well, I got news for you. It doesn't matter how many times they roll that die. Eventually, that's where the adventure you wrote is. And, really understanding that you don't have to make them roll 8 times and have everybody sit there waiting for them to roll a 16 or higher. Instead, you can just go, you rolled a 5. Okay, so it takes 2 extra days to find it. You burn through half of your food, and now you can't rest as much once you're there, right? That's fine. That's a fine solution. It keeps the story moving and moves past what is fundamentally the boring part of the game. I think when we planned and announced that we were adding these sorts of mechanics to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there was a lot of people who were like, well, what, am I going to just fail forward in my fight against the Adiug? No, the Adiug will kill you and eat you and add you to its trash/food heap. That's a thing they have.
That's what they do.
So, but that's, you use it where it's appropriate to use it, where the story says, yeah, the story has to proceed past this obstacle. So failure just comes, you still get past it, but with some sort of penalty, right? Oh, they can't hack the computer system to get the door open. Well, they can still force the door open with brute force. It just takes longer and makes a bunch of noise. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing things that way. And that's really where those mechanics shine. They're there to allow the rules to kind of get out of the way of the story and just be like, yep, that's how the roll worked. Let's move on with the tale.
Mm-hmm.
There's that scene in Rise of Skywalker where they end up in quicksand and then they all fall into the quicksand and it ends up the quicksand is the way. That's moving to the next point in the plot. Like,
Spoilers,
that's failing forward done poorly. That's writing yourself into a corner, and it's like, I either kill you all or I really improv however I have to.
All of you now have magical quicksand resistant boots. Congratulations! You walk over the quicksand.
Yeah, my favorite version of failing forward is you succeed, but in an embarrassing way. And then I just kind of lower the status of the character, take them down a notch, but continue to move the things forward.
You made it past the trap, but your pants fell down.
And now everybody can see your butt.
I also really like when they have to fail forward. It either, like, like you all have said, it has a cost, or this definitely hurt them in some way. They're going to regret the failure, but it's going to mean something going forward. But I also like, now it means you've got an obligation because you had to call in a favor, or you had to do something you're going to have a cost, but it's later, and that can grow the story.
Yeah, very much.
All right, we are almost done our patrons' questions, but it does leave us with a lot of Discord questions that are going to go unanswered. I'm going to use these for my behind the screens GMing blog, but
another GM trick: never waste anything.
There you go. So I just apologies to anyone that was in Discord and was really hoping the question would get asked. I'm trying to skim through them to see which ones are completely different from things we've talked about so far. But anyway, so first we'll do the last couple of patron questions. One of them is from Timstagram. What is your ideal gaming setup? So if money and space were no issue.
Sure. So I really like having a sort of a multimedia feel to a table as much as I can, right? Because space is often limited. But if those things are not a factor, having really beautiful full color maps, tactical maps is a thing that I really like doing. Pawns and minis are a great thing to have. Like lights with dimmers, especially if you're running horror. But in any case, that can sort of raise or lower the drama level or the mood. Sound is a very, very, very important thing that I use in some fashion as much as I can. Sirenscape is a fantastic tool for that sort of thing. I actually have a little Bluetooth Bose speaker that I take with me at conventions and trips, and I use that sometimes in my convention games, usually in my after hours games. But I have usually got kind of a soundboard set up on different things. Movie soundtracks are a thing that I use a lot, kind of in the background. Or the Sirenscape sound sets as well. So really kind of having all of the senses engaged at one time. I've also been known to do stuff like light candles and then blow them out, or have incense, or that's how I haven't been able to do that at conventions. That's for my home games. But really, like I said, really engaging all of the senses in a way that helps players feel immersed in what's happening is a thing that I really enjoy doing, because I like seeing people's reactions to that.
For me, it's just a good table where everybody can gather around, and I don't know. I mean, I agree, right? If I can add bells and whistles, I will add bells and whistles, right? I'll add sound, I'll add atmospherics, I'll bring themed food. I've done that before, right?
I used to do that too. Oh, it's been years.
Yeah. Especially for like Halloween games. I always for Halloween games. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ultimately, right? I would love to, at some point in some distant future, where gaming pays me enough to buy a house, to have a kind of a the gaming den that has the nice fancy gaming table, and everybody can gather around it, and all the reference, and all the minis, and all the terrain, and all the pieces are everywhere, and it's got a projector set up. I mean, I could go on, but it's just a fantasy.
Oh, I'm sitting in this fantasy.
Yeah.
I spent many years, many blood, sweat, and tears building exactly that, and it changes every week. And I'm always trying to upgrade it, because I believe that the aesthetics really help with games. And the more I'm comfortable and enjoy the experience, the better game I'm going to run, the better the game they're going to play. So basically this is my hobby. This is my midlife crisis Corvette. This is
midlife crisis game table. Those things are expensive.
It's a tavern on wheels. This thing will go with me to every house I have for the rest of my life.
I think the best question to end on is one we got from Mark Moreland.
Oh no.
Okay.
And I am curious about what his motivation for asking this is, because it's a lot about how in today's social media, and how the published adventures have to be hyped, and therefore there are spoilers abound.
Mm-hmm.
How do you work with players who might know a lot about the campaign even before the campaign begins? Basically, it's a very Pathfinder specific and a very Mark Moreland specific way of asking how you deal with metagame information and potentially players knowing more about the plot than they should going into it.
Yeah. I feel like that this is a question that boils down to just kind of a general status quo when you're in the gaming industry, when you're a developer or a writer or a designer, and you're playing in a game. Odds are you are playing in a game that you worked on. Sometimes you're playing a game that you wrote or that you developed. A lot of us try to avoid that, but sometimes, sometimes you just don't. And so the importance of having you as having knowing those spoilers, really buying into the social contract of, I'm playing this game, I'm not letting my player knowledge affect my character's knowledge. I'm really making an effort to not cheat, basically, or not in some way try to steal the spotlight from the other characters or make myself feel smarter because I know what's going to happen and I pretend like my character has just figured it out, but really it's because I remember what's on page 46 from when I edited it, a month ago. That's a really common sort of thing with professionals, and so it's obvious to the GM when you're using player knowledge, especially if it's somebody who's worked on something or somebody who's watched a stream. And so I feel like that when it becomes evident that a player is using that player knowledge, that there needs to be a conversation between the GM and the player, in which you say, hey, maybe you didn't do this on purpose, and giving them the benefit of the doubt because that is important. But we're just really saying, it is important that everybody sort of have a fresh approach to it. And even if you know exactly how this is supposed to end, it might not end this way. In your game, all players and parties make different choices. So, don't expect that you know exactly what's going to happen, and please don't, do something that is illogical for your character because you know what's supposed to happen. And GMs can also mix things up. You can change where a key piece of information is found, like which NPC gives the players that, or where MacGuffin is located. You can change up key elements of the story fairly easily, especially if you're an old hand at it, without it really affecting the progression of the story. So I feel like that as long as everybody is up and up about not using that information, and the GM is aware of the fact that when someone is doing that, there's a conversation that needs to be had, then it's not really an issue. It's never been an issue for me, and I've definitely played with people and have been a person who's played games multiple times or played in something that I've worked on.
Yeah, so I absolutely right. In this biz, you definitely work with people who in some cases wrote the thing you're running them through. So like that suspension of disbelief is really critical. But going even beyond that, I think it kind of comes back to the fact that if you have a good bond with your players, if you have a good connection with them, if you've had a good session zero, every player should kind of know where the story is going to go. They're not going to know the details, they're not going to know the specifics, but you've given them that. You've asked them, where do you see your character going? What do you see the arc of this character? How do you think we might get there? You've given them that idea. Remember, you're sitting there telling a story with them.
Yeah.
I can't imagine sitting down to tell a story with someone when they don't know anything about the story. So, some bit of foreknowledge is actually good for your game. I'm not saying you tell them what's in the next room or that they know exactly, what treasure is in the next chest in the bottom of the dungeon. But to some extent, saying, hey, everybody, we're going to tell this, dramatic tale of loss, and your characters are going to have to struggle through it. And I want to know what you want to get out of that story. Right? Everybody kind of walks into it knowing this is the way they should act, right? Nobody sits down to play the Aliens RPG and thinks their character's going to make it out of it alive, right? You come at these things with some understanding of where things are going to go. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a natural part of the game and actually can be a benefit.
Yeah, and in my opinion, that it's not a problem until it's a problem, and if you've got everybody they are suspending their disbelief and all that, then it's not a problem. And if you've got a player where it is obviously a problem, that's when that conversation needs to happen.
Speaking of conversations, we've been talking for an hour and a half. It has been an absolutely amazing conversation. And honestly, if I had changed the questions we asked, it could have been a completely different conversation. This was a lot of fun, though. This was super informative. And I hope that our audience had as much fun as we did being a part of it. And again, apologies to anyone who didn't get their question asked. We will find some way to get these questions answered in some capacity. But before we go, first of all, Jason, I said at the beginning that I'd only been in demos that you GM'd, completely forgetting we were on the stage together at Gen Con. That was a huge deal for me. I didn't want to be like, oh, whatever. I don't know why it wasn't the first thing I thought of, but it was a big deal for me, and I really did appreciate that.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I needed to say that, and I'm sorry that I forgot about it.
You're good.
So, Jason, where can people find? Oh man, so many tears today. Tears, cats being tossed around.
Yeah, no, that's right.
A real memorable episode for a lot of reasons.
That's right.
Jason, where can people find you online? Find out more about you.
You can find me online at jason.com. You can also Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and Instagram, all at those /Jason Bulmahn. I'm on all of those. So, and assuming things keep going the way they are in Seattle, you can find me quarantined in my house. I laugh because it's really terrifying.
So, your audio cut out for me. I don't know if it cut out for everybody, but just as you were saying your URLs, you dropped out completely. So do you mind just repeating those just in case?
Okay. The URLs are, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. I think I might have said that already. All of those URLs /Jason Bulmahn, and you'll find me. Just make sure to put the H in the right spot. It comes right before the N at the end.
Somebody on Twitter was like, bulls don't have hair, men have hair, and hair starts with an H, so the H goes in the man.
That's sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's weird, and it takes a while to get there, but I think I'm going to remember where the H goes from now on.
Yeah, I have seriously contemplated changing my last name just to make that simple, but,
to Minotaur. Amanda, where can people find out more about you and find you online?
So I'm on Twitter at Amanda Hamon. My H always stays in the same place at the beginning of my last name. Simply to vex Jason Bulmahn.
You're not Amanda. Oh, man.
I am not. I mean, there are less nice ways that people say that, so in some cases. But on Twitter, I'm Amanda Hamon. And you can follow me there and check out what's going on. And I'm on the Paizo blog fairly regularly and on the Starfinder Wednesday stream that is on at 4 p.m. Pacific time every week. We are always talking about some new fun Starfinder thing. I'm not, of course, the only one on it. I'm on it occasionally, and the rest of our team will rotate and we'll talk about all the cool stuff that we've got going on. So that's me.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both once again a lot. This was a different format for us, but I feel like we really covered a lot of ground. We really had a lot of fun, and people will really take a lot away from this episode. So thank you both.
Yeah, great time, folks.
Thank you.
Perram, we'll be right back.
Yes, we'll be right back. And we're back.
In the Pathfinder news segment, we talk about all the latest happenings for the Pathfinder role-playing game from Paizo, from third-party publishers, from licensees. If it's relevant to you as a Pathfinder fan, we like to cover it here in the news segment. Starting with, this is a weirder piece of news for us because it is very retailer-specific, but ICV2 recently talked about how Paizo was launching a direct sales to retailer initiative with a rack program. So what a rack program is that instead of just asking retailers to shelve their books on a regular shelf like anybody else, there will now be a very Pathfinder skinned rack that you can order, or if you order a certain amount of product, you will get it either at a discount or for free. I don't remember if that is detailed in the article. And it has space for the variety of different lines. There will also be a direct to retailer initiative so that if retailers are looking for a specific thing, Paizo is spread across so many distributors, and typically in gaming stores, if you're going to order something to your game store, you're going to go through a distributor. There are so many Pathfinder products, there's so many Paizo products that some distributors don't cover all of the Paizo products. You have to have multiple distributors to have access to everything. So Paizo is just saying, like, if you're having a headache, Perram, am I supposed to stop talking?
In North America, at least, Paizo is only distributed through Diamond.
That is not what the article said. The article implied that one of the reasons they did this is because there are so many distributors that it is available through that can be confusing or frustrating, or there are just some things you don't have access to.
I am sorry. That confuses me.
All right. Well, the important thing is that one of the reasons this initiative is happening is so that retailers have access to all of Paizo's products. So if you ever were frustrated that you couldn't get a specific Paizo product at your local game store, or if there was just something that it felt like you were jumping through too many hoops, now you can just go from the hoops directly to Paizo, and it'll be a lot smoother going forward. Plus, there are these cool racks that I think a lot of collectors are going to try and get their hands on.
Yeah, I mean that always sort of happens with these collectible retail things. I mean, I may or may not be in possession of a few Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition things that were distributed in this manner. But it looked really cool, man. And it's a pretty small buy-in compared to what I've seen these for in the past. I remember to get our store the LED cool freaking 3rd edition and 4th edition signs, we had to pay thousands and order so many copies of the core rulebooks.
So, as a fan, as someone that knows gaming stores, is this something that impacts you in any way, Perram?
It only because I have had to go through this process before for D&D, for 2nd, 4th, dozens of other games, paints and stuff like that. The rack programs really help boost the status of a store. Those racks really make your store look more legitimate, and they draw eye to those products. There's a definite positive benefit to having this official display in your store, this official merchandise, this official marketing, to make players and customers feel more confident buying from you, and also, kind of make them feel like they're part of something bigger than just like a tiny little hole in the wall store. And I am really glad that Pathfinder is finally going down that road. It is sort of, honestly, in my opinion, it really helps elevate them up into, quote unquote, the big leagues a little bit. And I'm honestly surprised it took them this long to get to this space, because of how important this has proven to be for other similar product lines that I've had to order and manage for my game store in the past.
Well, I think one of the other advantages is we were talking last episode or a recent episode about just leftover playtest stuff and 1st edition stuff getting mixed in there and causing a lot of brand confusion. If you have a dedicated space for the current game, this is the 2nd edition space, and then maybe you can rack the other stuff in another area, that at least gets people to say, why is this separate from the other Pathfinder stuff? Is there something different about this product? The more people don't mistake the Pathfinder and 1st edition stuff when they are specifically looking for 2nd edition, the better it is for just everybody.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's a potential good thing, but my experience with these racks, both as somebody who ran a store and have been seeing them in many other stores, is that they will stay in this pristine, curated position for 1 month maximum, and then it will be everything related to this product will be placed into it, and eventually down the road there's going to be signs plastered over one of the signs, and it'll have completely unrelated products placed in it.
The other bit of news, this is not Pathfinder specific, but it is a callback to an important conversation we had a few episodes ago, and that is an update on the Kickstarter union situation where a couple of key employees were fired, and the employees claimed, and we don't have any specific information on the reason for it, other than they claimed they were fired because they tried to start a union at Kickstarter. And Kickstarter had a lot of blowback, and there were a lot of projects for people that were not affiliated with Kickstarter, but they were using Kickstarter, and they felt a lot of the brunt of the blowback. Well, Kickstarter has now officially unionized. It says again once again on ICV2, they're saying the Kickstarter employees voted for a union and a months-long period of organizing efforts. So, regardless of what actually happened leading up to now, we do know that there is a union being put into place, and the idea behind how unions are formed is that it is a third party does come in, and they are the ones that dictate a lot of what happens. Kickstarter may have say, but even if Kickstarter is an anti-union company, they will not just be able to create a union for an anti-union company. It is a third party, impartial people coming in saying this is how unions are done. So this is a positive step, a major positive step for that previous conversation that we had when we were all pretty disappointed in how Kickstarter had handled that situation, or at least how it was being reported that Kickstarter had handled it. Because again, we have no firsthand knowledge. We only have the reports that we've read.
Right. And the nature of those reports had a lot of us even wondering, is this a company we can continue to support morally for a lot of us? And then this is a very complicated issue with an enormous amount of information about it that would need to be digested. But overall, it seems to be trending in a positive direction.
Kitsune Warlock says, are they using Kickstarter to fund a union for Kickstarter employees?
I think that would be a GoFundMe.
That tickled me. Well done. That's all I have for news. Was there any news items that you remembered that I should have, that we should be talking about?
Did we talk about Wrath getting a turn-based mode?
No, did we?
Don't know.
Talk about it anyway.
They did! Wrath of the Righteous announced they're officially getting a turn-based mode. And if you have not played the Kingmaker with the turn-based mode on, go try it. Oh, and I can tie this into a recent announcement. I know that this is not technically Pathfinder related, but I know that a lot of Pathfinder fans are going to be interested in the fact that Baldur's Gate 3 is a thing, considering Baldur's Gate 2 is one of the major inspirations for the Kingmaker games. Baldur's Gate 3 just had the trailer, which looks amazing, and the gameplay demos finally released to the public, and that also looks amazing. It definitely looks like we are playing Baldur's Gate 3, not some game named Baldur's Gate 3. But they have opted to go turn-based as well. So there seems to be this huge trend for these real-time with pause games to getting turn-based modes or becoming turn-based games like Divinity Original Sin. And I did install the turn-based mod onto my Kingmaker game for my most recent playthrough, and it has really made it an enjoyable experience, and I'm having way more fun doing it this way than playing it in its vanilla method. I think mostly because it feels so much more like Pathfinder that I'm able to very tactically choose all my exact actions and control my party like an organized SWAT team descending on a room full of hostages. It's just fake. It's just so fantastic.
Archives of Nethys KO in chat is saying that they love real time with pause, but they understand that they lost that war. Long live turn-based. They might be talking more specifically about Baldur's Gate, but when we're talking about Wrath of the Righteous, it's turn-based is an option, right?
Yes,
there will still be real time with pause.
Option. And the cool thing is they're actually working with the person who made the mod for Kingmaker to integrate it into the game officially. So they're actually working with the team that made this happen for their old game and bringing them in as part of the process, not just doing it on their own.
Very cool. I do remember in the Ron Lundeen episode that I missed, in the banter section, you did talk a lot about it. I don't think at the time they had officially done it, but you did talk about the mod for Kingmaker that you were such a fan of. Like, you were basically saying you couldn't play without it.
I won't play without it again.
Wow.
I mean, I enjoyed the game without it for my first playthrough, but yeah, it's a game changer.
All right, Perram, it is your birthday.
Yay!
It is almost midnight.
No!
Well, okay, it's 11:15 here, so I've got some banter segments we could be talking about, but you're the one who, I don't know how heavy your birthday celebrations or your International GM Appreciation Day celebrations were. Are you up for a little bit of banter?
Absolutely.
All right. This is one I quickly just added to our list, so you might not know what I'm talking about when I say playtest mache. We were talking about what to do with those playtest books. Here's the thing. They are still good-looking books, especially Doomsday Dawn, which has the finished art. And sometime in the last couple of weeks, I was reminded of a birthday present that somebody on the G.I. Joe message board, their wife got them, and they were so keen on it that they shared it. What she had done is gone to dollar bins, got as many cheap G.I. Joe comic books as possible, and then basically paper mache'd a chair So when I say paper mache, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. You take you take like Mod Podge or some other glue-like material. Usually it's PLA based, and then you basically laminate pictures and printouts and picture and imagery onto an object using the glue as a laminate.
Okay, so I know it more. You use newspaper, you put it around a balloon, and then you make a mask.
Mhm.
But what you're talking about is the next step, the one I'm talking about, where she made a chair that it was just covered in G.I. Joe art. And because of the paper mache technique, it was laminated, so you could use it as a chair. It was properly done, and it was a really cool, unique item that this guy got to say he had in his collection. What I'm suggesting is that if these playtest books that no one knows what to do with, because no one particularly wants or needs them right now, if they start getting deep discounted, I might make myself some paper mache Pathfinder chairs out of them.
It sounds pretty cool, actually, and I think I have enough here to paper mache like my entire kitchen set.
Now, I have only ever seen the one example. I've never done it myself, but it seemed easy enough. It seemed like brilliant idea, simple execution. So it really is something that if it works once with one, there's plenty of material, there's plenty of pages in a Pathfinder book that I could potentially get a whole set for a game room. It's something that, again, I'm going to keep an eye out to see if these are deep discounted, because I really don't want to pay more than, so let's say $5 for a rule book to get the material.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
If I can start finding playtest material for $5 each, I might pick some up and just experiment with paper macheing a Pathfinder chair.
We talked about my time running a game store before. I actually did this to some of the game tables in our game room, where I would get like old dungeon magazines, and we would like do one up with like D&D art, and we use this exact same technique. We would use the paper mache using Mod Podge to basically laminate these images onto the table. We did one for like Pokemon, one for comic books, all sorts of things, so that the tables really stood out. And one of the times we did it with like Yu-Gi-Oh cards, Magic cards, and Pokemon cards, where we took a whole bunch of the commons we were not able to sell out, or just had way too many of, and just lined them up in a diamond pattern and paper mache'd them to the table. It was the worst decision we ever made.
Can I guess why?
Sure.
Because people lose their Magic cards and their cards on the table that's completely camouflaged for those cards.
Absolutely, exactly that. The superhero table and the Dungeons and Dragon table, and those tables were great. Those we kept those. We spent probably 3 whole days stripping Yu-Gi-Oh cards off of a table just because of how bad of an idea that was.
Oh wow! Because you could have, like, had you varnished it in a color so that it was like everything had a reddish tint or a greenish tint, then you would have the same effect without having that camouflage problem.
I know, but that was the year before I started studying graphic design to know to do that.
Oh, okay. Wow, that was a lot of heartbreaking work. It sounded like you put into that.
Nah, but it was a learning experience.
There you go. You failed forward, Perram.
Mm-hmm.
Now you are actually, I am surprised to hear that you have done this, because just as the bibliophile that I know that you are and the collector that I know you are, I am surprised you allowed that to happen to Dragon magazines and things that could be important to somebody's collection.
I was extremely judicious on which things were allowed to be destroyed for this project.
Smart. So this is not the only art project that you have been involved in. In fact, recently you've been showing off some pretty cool 3D printed models on Facebook, on our Discord, basically anywhere that you can post pictures, you've been posting them.
I mean, I have to. This has been absolutely amazing experience for me. So I totally went and got myself a resin 3D printer after years of wanting to do more 3D printing. I originally did have a filament-based 3D printer, which is like the ones that you feed the plastic fishing line into, and it melts it and then draws it into bumpy plastic stuff. And just was really frustrated with that experience, even though it was kind of really cool, but it was like much more of an investment of time and energy than I really have helping you run a podcast network. And so when I saw that the resin printers were really fire and forget, and especially the new ones are just like literally, it took me like less than 5 minutes to calibrate it, and then it was immediately printing like amazing quality miniatures for me, basically at any time. So I got one of those, started printing out minis like crazy. I've printed over 100 miniatures by now for my games. But I wasn't really content to go there, because if I was just telling you, hey, go get an Elegoo's Mars or a Prussia, which, you know, they're about $230 right now, to start printing out amazing quality miniatures, this would be a really boring banter. But what I figured out immediately was that because these were digital files, I could manipulate them. And I have been studying and wanting to really dive into 3D modeling for a long time. So I very quickly started to do basic things like, hey, can I repose a model, like say from Hero Forge, where I want to have this in multiple poses, but I don't want to pay them $8 every time I just move their arm around. And then I was like, figured out that, yeah, you can rig a skeleton in Blender, and then you can manipulate a 3D model just like the pros do to make your movies or to make your video games. And it was surprisingly easy for me to wrap my brain around. And then I started to learn to sculpt faces and bodies, so it was no longer limited to just what the options I had available to me in pre-downloaded stuff. Or again, like go to Hero Forge, I can't quite get the face how I wanted, so I learned how to sculpt faces from scratch by watching a ton of YouTube tutorials on how to do it. I learned how to change the body proportions, to make feet, to make hands, to make clothes, to make weapons. And then I started to kit bash, because you can find, like, you know, lots of 3D objects on Thingiverse that are like standalone. Like, this is a cool sword, this is a cool hat, this is a really cool horse. And ultimately, I was able to do, for instance, I took a Hero Forge mini and customized it with some products I got from Thingiverse, and then just some custom sculpting to get my miniature of Perram to look exactly like the art I commissioned for him years ago. And then...
Hold on. You were moving them around. You never actually got a steady shot of them for the audience.
Sorry, I don't have a view of what I'm doing here. So, you know what?
There we go. That's pretty good.
Let me just pull it up on screen here. That's the better way to do it. But while I'm doing that, I then started to like get really cool files, like this Chocobo miniature that had a knight on it originally, and then I just, you know, shrank it down to Hobbit size, like took sculpting tools to cleave the knight off of it, and then reposed Perram on top of it to make him ride this. I'm busy like making custom models. Like I just built a custom airship out of spare parts and custom sculpted parts, and this really cool looking book I bought on my mini factory, so that for my Kings of War army, I can have a wizard just riding around on this really sweet looking Final Fantasy like airship instead of what's supposed to be a wagon. And just the freedom that just being able to sculpt stuff, modify stuff, make exactly what I want in my head, and then just hit print, and 3 hours later I'm holding a mini in my hand that looks better than anything I've gotten from Deep Cuts or Reaper, because the SLA machine is able to print things at angles that molding processes aren't capable of.
Now, Perram, I think in all that, did you actually not mention the dancing Perram miniature?
Oh my goodness, I didn't. Okay, so I'm going to pull that up on screen here.
Please do.
And then you can see. So when I was trying to answer the question, you know, hey, can I repose this thing? And the answer to that question, you know, how much could I repose a Hero Forge mini? And when I started to do that process, I'm going to have to pull this up on screen. Give me just a small minute here to make that happen. I was not prepared for pulling this up, so I'm going to have to add a window capture onto our screen here. And it's going to need to window capture the... no, not window, monitor capture. So I rigged it up, and I used this. I used a piece of software called Mixamo. Adobe puts it out. It makes it real easy to put an armature on something, and it taught me basics about how to make a skeletal armature. I have quit using that to make my armatures because I found out how easy it was just to do it in Blender from scratch anyway. But the basic gist of it there is, where in the world is the display? There, display capture. Um, the cool thing about it is that I was able to then animate it, and then not only animate it but set it to music. And so this is going to get us copyright strikes.
Oh, can you mute it?
If I just play it really briefly, we're fine, as long as it's under 20 seconds.
Okay.
And then I was basically able to do this. Completely manipulate this to my heart's content and make anything I want to make.
You're still screen sharing. There we go. Okay. So one of the things is, like I said, you've shared this everywhere. So at any given time, it was on my screen for a lot for a whole day, and I was usually listening to music, and then I would like change windows and open Discord or whatever. And Dancing Perram would always be dancing to the tune of whatever I was listening to. It was really impressive, just the rhythm that Dancing Perram had. So on top of having smooth moves, it just fit into so many soundtracks.
Oh man, and that's really odd because actually it took me a little bit of effort. Like, it took me more time syncing it up to that music exactly than it did to get him to dance in the first place.
Wow. Well, it opened my eyes to the potential of the way you were manipulating these miniatures. Because, like, you'd shown a couple of pictures of, like, here was a miniature, here's a miniature in a slightly different pose thanks to this technique I was using. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I had no idea the potential to just smoothly, fluidly animate the miniatures that you had rigged up.
And yeah, just I'm gonna go through some screens here. Like, this was like me getting him onto the bird to begin with, and this was after I resculpted his face entirely to match his character art. There I've got spells, effects, and like a hat I got from Thingiverse, and then I like basically half resculpted the hat. And then here is him in my hands. And because I was able to resculpt him in one pose, I made a standalone version too, and I'll be able to keep reposing him infinitely. And I'm doing this with other miniatures now too, for like my sibling wants this really cool army of elf archers on elks, and nobody makes that, but I can find elks, and I can find archers, and I can find elf heads. And so I'm in the process of getting them a whole knighthood versus of elk knights that will not have existed until I put those together.
Very cool. Perram, I've got a paint to play tomorrow that is not going to be a painted miniature. I was playing with some foam clay of Scarlets and made some monsters, and I got to tell you, I'm almost embarrassed to post pictures of it because it is so amateurish compared to what you put up. Like, in that article, the first thing I'm going to post is a picture of what Tina, my wife, and Scarlett, my 5-year-old daughter, were able to do as an apology to the clay manufacturers before showing what I did with it. Because what I did, it's full of potential. It inspired a monster, and I think a very cool monster. The point of the article tomorrow will be the monster stat block that goes along with it. But Derek Goldmeyer's in chat saying, no shame. I'm going to share it, but trust me when I say shame. Full reason for shame. Have I mentioned I'm not a visual person, Perram?
You have so many skill sets at such a high level that you're allowed to have a dump stat.
Thank you. That's just because I lean into the skill sets. I have more dump stats than I let on.
Number 18 asked, I missed it, what programs are you using for all the changes? This gets to be a long list, but most of the work is done in Blender, which is an open source and free 3D modeling program that is extremely powerful and used by professional 3D artists. But it's got a great community of tutorials. It's easier to learn than you think it is. It's also extremely intimidating, but don't let yourself get scared of it. Just start learning to use it. I encourage people that are interested to just hammer at it. I learned at a very quick pace, thanks to the very supportive community out there to help people get on board with this. I then used Adobe Mixamo at first to get my rigging done very quickly. And it's like it's a piece of software that is on a website run by Adobe. It's completely free. You can get on there and rig up some simple basic characters like people, horses, things that are horse shaped, things that are dog shaped, bird shaped things. Also, bird shape works for dragons. I found out. You just just figure out where the bone should be, and then
Well, I mean, Jurassic Park taught us that birds evolved from dinosaurs, so it all makes sense.
And that will definitely make it easy. And then once you understand the basics there, you can go back into Blender and learn how to make your own skeletons that are, this process is fairly simple once you understand what's going on. And then that opens the world up to infinite things can be animated. And Mixamo also was able to get the animation files there. And then I just used OBS and video editing to sync it up with music. So there was no special software to sync it up to the J-pop. And then I used Pressure Slicer and Mesh Mixer to do some basic edits to slam some things together, and Pressure Slicer to add the supports, and then you kick it over to Chi2 Box to actually print it out on your resin printer.
We probably shouldn't talk about this on the air. We talked about something. Anyway, no, that's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm never going to use, but I am very proud that you have figured out how to use it, Perram, and the results have really spoken for themselves. They are pretty awesome. Yeah. So I had an interesting turn of events, Perram.
Oh,
a couple of weeks ago, I received my my box from Paizo of stuff for review, and unusually, it included an AP volume. It had volume 1 of Extinction Curse. Now, normally I get the hardcovers. Every now and then they'll throw in card packs. We talk with Paizo about what we are most likely to review, and then they send me the things that we talk about. In this case, though, they just threw in the Extinction Curse volume 1 out of the blue, unexpected. And so I was flipping through it at the table at work, because when you get a package at work, you get people asking you, hey, what was in that package? So I was showing it around. I showed it to my friend Emily, and she has never had any interest in second edition before. She's still fairly new to first edition and very happy with first edition. She's in my Emerald Spire game. But she really liked the look of Extinction Curse. And so one of the reasons that I've been saying, like, there's no chance I play or run or have anything to do with Extinction Curse, and one of the reasons that was the episode we were comfortable with me missing, the Ron Landina interview about it, is because I would never do anything with Extinction Curse. This was just one of those APs I wasn't going to have any personal experience with. Within a couple of hours of Emily saying, wow, this is a really interesting looking adventure path, we had enough people at work interested in an office, not just Pathfinder game, which I had already kind of started talking about and was going to just do some quests leading into Pathfinder Society scenarios. Nope, now we've got an office Pathfinder adventure path. I will be GMing Extinction Curse. Since second edition came out, I said just not enough people in my area have been showing an interest in second edition. I really have to struggle to get games, but within minutes of seeing Extinction Curse, whatever it is about playing in a circus that I don't quite see the same appeal of as everybody else, well, that caught on, it spread throughout my office, and now I will be running Extinction Curse.
Wow, I could not have put together a combination of events that I believed would happen less than that sentence you just told me.
Yeah, I just to be clear, I have nothing against Extinction Curse. The Extinction Curse, my main reaction to Extinction Curse is it's neat. I'm just surprised how into Extinction Curse everyone else is. But that one thing led to another, and now I'm running Extinction Curse. I will get firsthand experience of other people experiencing this game, seeing if it meets their lofty expectations, because my expectations are this should be fun. But for all I know, some people are like, this will be the greatest adventure path we have ever played in.
And then I highly recommend that you listen to our episode that we recorded while you were having your vacation. And
it was the first thing I listened to when I got back. Don't worry, Perram. I may listen to it again, though, just because there are a lot of good tips in there.
I mean, I'm really excited for it. And I just think that a lot of people have this nostalgic love for the idea of a circus. And especially with Americana and mythology, that it has a humongous place, the idea of this traveling big top show. And even though the realities of those big top shows are not very good when you look too deep, as long as it's all fantasy and magic and talking elephants, then it's okay, because they want to be here.
I mean, that applies to most things in Pathfinder. This is a very romanticized version of a mix of a lot of things that fully historically not super great.
Nope.
So but I can't even play the like, oh, well, maybe it's just a cultural thing. Maybe it's just as a Canadian, I don't get the same romanticization of circuses, because it's a bunch of Canadians that were like, we have to play in this game at my office. So no, it really is something that appeals to me, appeals to other people way, way more. I will say the art in the book, though, is super fun.
I'm less astonished that it's this adventure path and more Ryan Costello is going to GM a second edition adventure path, emphasis on adventure path, with how much you've talked about not enjoying running adventure paths before.
So I actually have a whole bunch of anecdotes about GMing that we didn't have time to get into in the chat. So I will go over a couple of highlights of my GMing style and why I don't like running adventure paths. And that is that my ability to retain information that I've read is one of my worst ways of learning and one of my worst skills. One of those skills that I was talking about, my dump stats, whereas my ability to create things on the fly is much stronger. It's one of my strongest skills. And so I lean into that. And the best example of it, if people listened to the Mimips 11 side quest we did for Adventurous for a while, is that one of the few things I statted out was a character called Rosh that was largely based on Stonefist, an action figure from the Boss Fight Studios Vitruvian Hacks line. I renamed so that I'm not just flat out stealing Stonefist from them. As soon as the adventure started, I started referring to this character as Stonefist every single time, until at the very end when the stat block comes out and it's like, oh, this isn't Stonefist, this is Roche. What have I done? That is the kind of thing that happens to me when I run canned adventures, because as soon as something is written down on a page, my ability to access it becomes a struggle. However, I'll be running this at lunchtime. We will be playing about 45 minutes a day. I believe I'll be able to prepare 45 minutes of adventure. I believe that I will be so into moving things forward that I will be comfortable with whatever I gloss over, and then I will have a chance to reread what I had just gone over, take some notes of the changes that I've made, some things that I may have missed, some things that I may have changed, and hopefully just forward momentum from one session to another. This will not be an extinction curse like anybody else's extinction curse. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. I'm introducing a lot of new players to Pathfinder, the world, the role-playing game, second edition, with this adventure path. So one of the caveats is going to be like, we're going to be broad, we're going to be fun focused, we're going to be forward momentum focused. We're not going to worry too much about the rules. And since what people are buying into is the concept, I think people are going to be okay with that.
Yeah. And honestly, we just listened to a lot of the advice we gave here. It doesn't matter what was in Extinction Curse. It's the game you and your players enjoy that matters.
Oh, Dungeon Novice in chat is saying, I haven't played 2E at all, but I'm planning on picking up EC to help inform my pro wrestling homebrew 1E game I'm planning. That is an interesting idea, because a lot of, especially 80s pro wrestling, was like the carny lifestyle where you were just moving from one town to another and you were 100% invested in it. So that is an angle I might take when I'm running Extinction Curse. I have listened to a lot of wrestling podcasts. I'm going to shout out to one in the shoutouts in a few minutes, and that will definitely be able to help me add texture to the adventure. Oh, there's this Perram. I just want to dive into a lot of the stuff we didn't get to cover in that.
I know, man. There was
interview.
Just so much good stuff in those questions, and I didn't even get to ask all my questions.
I know. No, there was definitely towards the end. I was looking at you. It's like, I think it's been about 20 minutes since Perram said anything. But we either sacrifice even more questions, or we just keep going with the way we were going. So I apologize to a lot of people, Perram. I should apologize to you as well. Especially, it's your birthday on GM Appreciation Day, and you kind of had to go backseat for a couple of those questions.
You know what this GM appreciates? Good content.
There you go.
And that's what we got today.
And you know what, Perram? We could always just have a follow-up, because we had a GMing episode a few weeks ago with
Right.
Stephen Glicker, where we were talking very mechanically focused. Then last episode, we reviewed the Game Mastery Guide, and it was talking a lot about things GMs care about. And so one of my concerns with this episode was, have we overdone GM content? But considering the reaction to it, the size of the audience tonight, and of course the quality of the interview itself, I have a feeling that people still have a lot of room in their lives for GM content. So maybe in a couple of months, we will revisit these questions and you and I will put a little more of our personal spin and stories into them, because there is still a lot that we could go into, and just a lot. I think these questions will help clarify and solidify some of the differences between our approaches. Because you called the arguments. We don't argue. We just have very different skill sets and takes on how to GM.
I'm just exaggerating for the audience, just like when you're
I
playing
know.
in an actual play.
And still, I am very meticulous about accuracy and word choice. And so I needed to make sure it was clear we were not arguing, or at least not from my point of view.
No, Lord.
Maybe I'll move this last banter item to shoutouts, and then I'm ready to wrap up if you are.
I am indeed ready to get to the shoutouts.
All right, we'll be right back to wrap things up right after this.
Wrap-ups and shoutouts. Wrap-ups and shoutouts. Wrap-ups. Wrap-ups and shoutouts.
And we're back.
Thank you for joining us for episode 223 of No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. Thank you specifically to Jason Bulmahn and Amanda Hamon for, once again, that amazing conversation. Also, thank you to our patrons and our members from Discord who provided a lot of the questions and the content of that interview. And thank you to chat, who I just mentioned. It was a very large chat for us today. We didn't get a lot of questions from chat, but chat was active. They were having really engaging conversation, and they were responding to us. So I have a feeling people in chat had a really good time, even if we didn't reference them as often as we usually do. But I will reference something Fat Ass Frodo was saying, where he says GM content has the side effect of informing players on how to respond well and play along better with a story. That's a really valid point, and that reflects an anecdote I wanted to get into but never did. So we were talking about my friend Mark, who's the person that did a lot of, he did long form GM prep before launching a campaign. And I just remember one session where he was talking about how we were walking by a stream of lava, and one of the players in the group talked about how lava has such radiant heat that we would all be immediately dehydrated. We would be blistering, and listed a whole bunch of side effects of actually being that close to lava. And so this then led to all the players, myself included, suddenly acting like we're all geology experts, and kind of ripping into Mark a little bit for this apparent mistake. I don't even know if what he was saying was true, but having now been on the flip side of that, I realized we went a little too long, we went a little too specific, and it was just like ribbing the GM when the GM has two minds at all times already going on of like, I want to move things forward, I want to keep track of details, and I want to make sure everyone's having fun at the table. Neither of the GM's objectives were moving forward. There was people having fun at the table, but not everyone was having fun at the table in that instance. And that was something that I think back on often as like, that was poor player behavior on my part, that the more GM experience I got, the more I realized we overdid it. We overreacted. We took the fun away from the GM. And even though I do think of the GM as the fun facilitator, the players have a part in the fun facilitation for the GM side of it too.
I mean, I've definitely run games at full GM burnout where I am just here to get the hours through and hope that I can get more into it next week. And my players notice. There's nobody has a great time if the GM's having a miserable time.
But it is time for shoutouts. These are conversations that you and I will have again in the future because, again, chat seems to approve of the idea of more GM content. So maybe 2020 will be the year of the GM.
But this might be confirmation bias because they showed up for the GM episode.
Ah, that's true. All right, well then, maybe we won't do more GM stuff. All right, well, the first shout out is to you, of course, Perram. It is your birthday. It is, we had a lot of extra content recently, which you spearheaded for the most part. And even though this was a regularly scheduled episode, we didn't have to do an episode on your birthday because we just had an episode last week, as well as an episode before that. So 3 episodes in a row. Oh no, plus you did the Owlcat interview that was pre-recorded. So in a very tight span, we had a lot more content. Thanks to you, thanks to the effort you're putting in. And so if you had said, I want my birthday off, I want to have cake and, party hats and whatnot, it would have been completely acceptable. We would have just figured something out with the schedule. You were more than happy to give up your birthday to have this cool experience of having an episode about GMing on GM Appreciation Day. So on top of just happy birthday to you and all the best for you, your life, your happiness, and just continue to be an awesome person. And hopefully the world reflects that awesomeness in gifts back to you. Thank you for all that you've done for the network and the gifts that you have given to us.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. Honestly, this is such great guests that we've had these very good opportunities to talk to. This is kind of like the best way I could have spent my birthday. It was just geeking out with you and Jason and Amanda talking about GM stuff.
Well then, that was my gift to you. That and the Alan Cooper art that I shared with you.
That was really cool and unexpected.
I'm glad. So shout outs. I want to shout out to Randall's Societas. We've been talking about it for a while. It finally launched and it is a blast. So now we're having a session 0 on there, which is largely testing out the mechanics of the bot that he created. But even just the light role playing and the light interaction that we've done with the bot, this is a ton of fun. Now, Randall also just did a major move all the way up the West Coast. And so the last couple of days have been a little rocky for him, but just what we've gotten to play, like everyone is engaged, everyone is super bought into it. And as soon as he unplugs that test channel so that everyone can check it out, I recommend people check it out. I will be talking a lot about the experience in the future. We've gone long. We've talked about a lot of other things tonight. So this will be something I shout out to in greater detail in the future. But remember, Randall is running the Societas game on Discord, which just in case you don't know, he is running a play-by-post on our Discord channel for myself, some network members, some of our patrons, and he created a robot that knows Pathfinder that we are interacting with in amazing new ways, and it's changed how I view what Pathfinder could be once again.
Mm-hmm. Something I want to shout out to is for our patrons and our non-patrons. We appreciate our patrons a lot. We also appreciate every single person that has made themselves part of our community. Pay attention for the next couple of weeks on through the Discord chat, and I have recently stepped down as the Pikeville venture officer. My future involvement in the society as a whole as a venture officer is kind of up in the air right now and being decided, but I definitely do want to get my society fixes in, and the first place and I'm going to be going to for that is our own Discord to recruit people pretty randomly for some Roll20 games. We may stream these, so if you do sign up for one of these, it might get streamed. These aren't going to be edited professional content. We're just going to have a good time. You might be on our Twitch channel. I just really want to run some games, and they put out 2 new adventures I haven't run yet, and I need to keep my record of running all of them.
Get on it.
Yeah.
What are you doing after this episode goes off the air?
Editing it.
That's true. All right. Well, you can do that while jamming, right?
Sure. And I can also, recompile my operating system at the same time.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
You are so good at keeping balls in the air. Keeping plates spinning.
That's better.
Juggling. You're
right.
a good juggler.
Yeah. Do you have another shout out, Ryan? Because I've got one more.
I have several. So one of them is something that was brought to our attention on Twitter. Mm-hmm. It is Battle FX Fantasy 3D printable spells, magic, props, and more. Now, Perram, if it wasn't for you and your 3D printer, and other people that I know that may have access to 3D printers in the future, depending on how well they're able to fix it after it was stored in an unhospitable environment for 3D printers, this is now something that's suddenly on my radar. So it is accessories effectively for your miniatures. So it's not actually there are some miniatures that you can buy for it, but the main draw here is that you can get 3D printable tokens for your spells, And that's something that's always appealed to me. The idea of like, here's a magical effect going on. Here's a physical representation of it, a miniature alongside your miniature, you know, your character's miniature on the table. There is a lot of really cool 3D designed components to this. There's also a special base that you're able to plug in your miniature for. The one that looks the best, if you check out the Kickstarter, is a shield spell that puts a protective dome in front of the miniature, and it looks like it's being penetrated by arrows that it has just managed to barely stop from reaching you. Very cool effect. It's something that I haven't backed yet. You and I will have to discuss if I can use your 3D printer for, you know, my own devices. But I definitely like the idea of it. And with 3D printers becoming more and more common, and with Perram, you becoming like an ambassador of 3D printers effectively, this is something that I think a lot of people will want to check out. So it's Kickstarter, Battle FX Fantasy, 3D printable spells, magic, props, and more.
Yeah, there's a lot of free things on like Thingiverse and some paid for things on other things that are kind of like this too, if you want to just get a taste for it. But this is definitely the highest quality I've seen, and definitely the most complete collection I've seen at this Kickstarter. So I'm keeping my eye on this one as well. It's a really cool implementation, and they thought about a lot of the use cases. And that shield spell looks great. I also really like the grasping hand thing, and they've got it. It's not just beneficial. You can get a spiritual weapon that looks like it's bonking someone, and then you can put it on the enemy's base. Bonking.
Yeah,
them.
they had a couple of different things where it was like, here's a status effect as a ring that you can throw onto the other, like on the miniatures that's being affected by it. There's actually a lot going on with this Kickstarter. It's worth checking out because I went into it expecting it to be like, here's a fireball, you know, plastic dome that you can put, and it's measured to the right size. But just watching the video, it's like, and here's miniatures with swappable hands because they're magnetic. Here's this, here's that. It goes on for quite a bit. It's less like they're launching a product and more like they are launching a line and a company.
Right. And the next shout out I want to give is a shout out for a Kickstarter that I'm involved in. The Advanced Occult Guide is being put out by Everybody Games, and as well as Rogue Genius Games. So that's, you know, network members Alex and Owen and a lot of crew working on this. I don't even know all the names that we might be involved with that are working on this, but I definitely am on the writers list. It is currently funding. This is the last day and a half of funding for it. So if you're interested, go check that out. It's basically a bunch of really cool, weird science options for Starfinder. So if you want weird transformations or shrinking things, or all sorts of horrible things that can go wrong in a mad scientist laboratory, this explores a lot of that. I mean, the cover is a giant cheese monster fighting laser beams while another like bee person attacks a group. It's off the walls bonkers, and I kind of really want to write some monsters for it.
Well, now you've said that out loud, Perram. We'll see what happens there. It's ending soon, right?
Yeah. This is the last day and a half of it. So by the time you listen to this, it might be too late.
Well, then people better listen to this quickly.
I'm gonna edit fast.
You mentioned Owen. I also have a shout out that's related to Owen. He was on Dice Geek's Tabletop RPG show, and it was a great episode. And it's just, I love listening to Owen. I love listening to him talk. He is engaging, eloquent, entertaining, informed. He's just, any chance you get to listen to Owen, or better yet, to have a conversation with Owen, take it up. And this Dice Geek interview really does cover a lot of his, you know, his origin story, a lot of the highlights of his career. And it's a fun listen. It's exactly everything I like about an Owen interview, including it being a lot of Owen. So dikegeek.com, I've shouted out to them before. It was a podcast that I was on, and they still managed to make their way into my podcatcher, which is not by default. So you know that it's still something that I enjoy and listen to the episodes, basically all of them. Every now and then I get a little backlogged, and that's the kind of one that gets shuffled out of the backlog. So it's still a high priority podcast for me. I find them entertaining, but seeing that Owen was on one, that put that one at the top of the list.
Sweet, I'll have to get it.
Yep, but that is not the podcast I'm shouting out to today. Today I'm shouting out to, well, I mean, I am positive shouting out to that as an episode, but every episode I've been shouting out to the next podcast alphabetically in my podcatcher. And today, as I alluded to earlier, I'm shouting out to a wrestling podcast called Chasing Glory. Let me tell you about wrestling podcast, Perram.
Mm-hmm.
Wrestlers are fascinating people because, one, they are succeeding in a very hyper-competitive realm, and so it's just hard, and so most of them have cool success stories, and that is the focus of Chasing Glory, not just on why they like wrestling, but what they had to do to overcome the challenges to stand out and to succeed. The other thing is that they are in an extremely competitive field where part of the competition is completely fake, and they have to be convincing that they are the ones that should be winning these fake fights. And there's such an amazing blend of, some of them are just straight up jocks. Some of them are like drama nerds. Some of them are just wrestling fans who just stuck to their fandom. And so listening to wrestlers talk about wrestling is one of the most just interesting interview topics. So I have several wrestling podcasts on my feed, but the one that I find the most fulfilling right now is Chasing Glory. The host is Lillian Garcia. She was the ring announcer for the WWE for a long time. Then she moved on to MMA, and she brings in a lot of people that have inspirational stories that she knows personally. So she already knows, like, she has basically personally vetted them just by knowing these people and knowing who would have the best things to say and different angles to talk about than what these same wrestlers have talked about on other podcasts, where they talk a little bit more about shop. So this really is about people succeeding in a field that they are completely committed to. And they're weird, interesting people. They've got that carny atmosphere that we were talking about earlier. If you have never listened to a wrestling podcast, there was one specific episode of another one I would recommend, but just broadly, Chasing Glory with Lillian Garcia is one that it's just like, this will get you the most positive version of why wrestling podcasts are such an interesting thing, especially because up until like 10 years ago, it was super taboo to talk about anything behind the scenes with wrestling. I guess more like 20 years ago. And then Mick Foley put out his book, which was autobiographical, and it suddenly changed what people were allowed to talk about in the wrestling business. And now wrestlers from all points of wrestling history are desperate to talk about the things that they were told you're never supposed to talk about with non-wrestlers. And you get just enthusiasm, you get history, you get just people from all walks of life and different backgrounds talking about this thing, that this weird, very specific form of entertainment that just happens to really speak to a lot of people.
Yeah, wrestling is definitely something I'm much more interested in the meta around than I am actually watching the shows.
And that's, the podcasts are all about the meta. Like, nobody does what's called a kayfabe podcast. Nobody does a podcast as though they're speaking to the characters and not the wrestlers. No, you're always talking to the performer, but the line between the performer and the character is often weirdly thin. And one last shout out: I saw Pixar's Onward, and it's very good. And it is, I think it's something that would interest, excuse me, RPG audiences specifically. Like, there's an extensive conversation about gelatinous cubes at one point in it. The magic in the world is based on there are role-playing games in the world, but they are considered like we would consider a historical war game. And so when magic becomes a factor in the plot, they are often referencing RPG rulebooks. So on top of it being just a very emotional and a very Pixar movie, it also just happens to be a very nerdy RPG movie as well.
Okay, I had written this one off completely. I am now going to go see it this weekend.
I had also written it off completely, but it just happened to be, so it's supposed to come out this week. We had like a coupon that expired this weekend, and there just happened to be an advanced screening in select cities, and we happened to be one of the select cities. So we were like, fine, we'll just use this coupon, see Onward with the girls. They'll probably enjoy it. And no, it passed the did you cry test. Me and Tina both were crying by the end of it. We were really just following along the whole story. It is one of the best Pixar movies that's been put out in a long time.
Well, do you know what I'm looking forward to that we haven't done in a long time?
What's that?
PaizoCon! It's only 79 days away, according to Darren Caldemeyer, the official PaizoCon countdown correspondent. It is May 22nd through 25th at the Seattle, Washington, at the Doubletree.
We have an important phone call about it tomorrow as well to see what we are going to be doing, because as people who watched this last year know, our PaizoCon coverage took a major step forward in what we were doing last year, and we're going to see what we do this year. So stay tuned for big announcements there, I guess.
I hope.
All right, Perram, that's the show. Episode 223. This not a fun number, but a great episode. I don't know why. I don't like the look of the number 223. It's been bugging me since I made the outline.
It's all right. At this clip that we're doing, we're going to hit like 333 sooner than later.
No, we are going back to our regular schedule as of this episode, by the way. So today was a regular scheduled episode. The next No Direction will be in 2 weeks, March 18th. What we do in the meantime is something that's being discussed on the boards. So stay tuned for those announcements. The events are usually posted on our page as of the Monday. They'll then be our webpage. They'll also get shared on Facebook and Twitter. So if you are interested in what's going on with No Direction Network, you can actually, Perram, tell people where they can find out more about the No Direction Network.
You can find out more from No Direction, including these shows and other excellent content like daily blogs about role-playing, Pathfinder, Starfinder, monsters, geekdom, and other awesomeness at nodirectionpodcast.com. That's where you will also find the link to our Discord server, the chillest place to hang out and talk about Pathfinder, RPGs, anime, giant robots, nerddom, geekdom, how to 3D model miniatures, and of course hang out with the other KD fans and the staff and personalities here at No Direction. The link is again on the right hand side over at nodirectionpodcast.com. And if you were also trying to get in touch with us, you can do so at our Facebook page at facebook.com/nodirection, at our Twitter page at twitter.com/nodirection, our YouTube page at youtube.com/nodirectionshow, as well as finding our Patreon at patreon.com/nodirection. And we would like to very much thank all of our patrons. It is only through your assistance that this accelerated rate of content is even possible, and we very much appreciate everything you're able to do for us.
Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Perram.
And if you want to find the path, you need No Direction.